The Pirate's Lass, a story of the Mongolian Book of the Sky by Jason Shannon. Read by Andrew C. Bunton. Music by Michael Hebbs. You'd better be good, or the Kimbers will come and get you. Little Casey Lennox could be a mean one. That Asian girl was outright shaking in fear of the name. The Dillashaw girl stepped up beside Casey, gave a yank to her ponytail. "Don't be a bitch, Case." "Ow, ow, ow," snorted Lennox. The Dillashaw girl had turned to the little one. "Don't worry about him, Sydney. That one's dead and buried. You've got nothing to worry about from him." Casey Lennox was just entering her teens, her first smattering of acne cropping up on her face like someone had thrown a bucket full of grease at her. She'd shot up a good 3 inches this past winter, and was starting to dress like all teenage girls do when they first start noticing boys. God knew, Penelope herself caked herself in makeup and wore huge hoop earrings at that age. The 3 girls were wandering about the market, taking their time looking at the different shops and booths. They were unarmed, except for Eunice Dillashaw, the oldest, who had a dagger on her belt. Before long, they'd be at Penelope's booth. She hoped their chaperone caught up with them before then, or at least that the 15-year-old Eunice had some sense to her. "What about the panther?" asked Sydney, the Asian girl. "Or that one that killed the worm?" "No one killed a worm," retorted Eunice, somewhat sharply. Then, softer, she added, "Worms don't exist, Sid." "Oh, I think they're out there," piped Casey. "I've heard them scream in the night." Then she took a wide stance, squatted down a little, and bellowed a growl from deep in her diaphragm. "Yeah!" Eunice just rolled her eyes at this, patted Sydney on the shoulder, but said nothing. Now they approached Penelope's booth. She sold used books, crammed into boxes labeled romance, sci-fi, thriller, suspense, highwayman, non-fic, history, and others. Everything from cookbooks and autobiographies, and New Age spiritual books on shamanism and finding your spirit animal. But her main sales, indeed, what she had laid out neatly on the table behind which she sat, was comic books. These were easy to produce, with staples instead of binding and glue. And as such, they weren't second-hand, dog-eared old tomes with yellowing pages. Some of them came off presses in the suburbs of Perth. She had 1 or 2 Black Fox issues right off the press in Montana, and a few of them were put together not far from here in a basement printing press near Sir Samuel. That's how she was going to make her money. Of course, Casey Lennox immediately picked up one of the comics, bypassing a couple of history books on the Battle of Hawaii and the eradication of the Caliphate, and a romance novel with washboard abs on the cover. No, she went straight for the Breastbinder comics. One of the ones, of course, from Penelope's contact near Sir Samuel. Moxie Breastbind and the Mad Khan's Menagerie, issue number 3. Penelope had read that one. Dialogue was kind of stilted. The history where it touched on the Chagatai Rebellion was completely wrong. And of course, it inserted this 20-something badass chick into a conflict from 15 years ago. She liked the artwork that Mulholland produced, but canon went completely out of the window with that kid. "Is that one where Princess Olje has 6 arms and spider fangs?" Sydney asked to Casey, who had by now flipped open the front cover. Penelope blinked, came back to herself. No, she suddenly realized, that was an issue that showed MB in the Mad Khan's harem, complete with lusty interludes with Iluge's concubines, nipple-sucking, and the sort of thing little girls like Casey Lennox and Sydney Wang probably shouldn't be looking at. Penelope suddenly blurted, unsure of what to do just then. Thankfully, Eunice Dillashaw snatched the comic out of Casey's hand. Eunice was a little older, and even though she was still a little young to be seeing the sort of thing Mulholland put in there, at least it might not piss all over her innocence. "Miss Humberton," Eunice asked, flipping through a few pages, "is this one of the ones that—" And she trailed off, having flipped another page, and clearly having her question answered. Eunice looked at it for a second. Penelope still had the urge to reach out and rip the comic from her hand. Eunice said presently, "Case, I'll buy you this one in a few years, when you're a little older." "Thank you, Miss Dillashaw," Penelope said, using the adult method of address. Casey looked irritated. "Is there more wanking in that one?" Eunice shot her a cold stare. "You're not supposed to know what that is." "Well, Eunice was pulling her ponytail again. She handed the comic to Penelope. Sydney was looking confused. What? I'll explain it when you're older, came a new voice. Penelope's gaze jerked up to the booth's entrance. She felt her face flush, her ears warm. And not just because she was holding what was essentially sensual art and had 3 underage girls at her table. Moxie Carver strode in. This woman, not Eunice, was clearly the girl's minder for the day. She was, as usual, armed to the teeth, $1,000 bow over her shoulder, finely forged scimitar at her hip, a dagger on her calf. Penelope always felt embarrassed, uncomfortable around Miss Carver. And not just because the woman was the definition of a cold shoulder, but if there was ever any woman that... No, Moxie Breastbind was a fictional character, and was named that because she had moxie, spunk, brass. Not because she was based off a real woman who bound her chest and executed state officials. Carver stepped up behind the girls. "Sydney, there's no such thing as worms," she said, her voice soft, reassuring the child. "Eunice, don't use the word bitch, it's unladylike." How long had Miss Carver been observing this exchange? Casey furrowed her brow. The girl was clearly irritated. She wasn't going to get her comic, and Penelope knew from her recent training sessions with Kelly that the Lennox girl was going to become quite the comic nerd in her teens. The girl looked up to Carver and spat, "I've heard you use the word ca—" 2 of Moxie's fingers were suddenly pinned on the girl's lips, shushing her. Calmly, Carver said, "When you're all grown up, no one's going to pull your hair for those words. You can make your decisions freely then." Eunice grinned, reached over, and gave one more quick tug on the girl's ponytail. "Yeah, you B-word." Moxie Carver now snatched up a 600-page hardcover from a dusty box to her right. "Miss Lennox, this will serve you a lot better than a picture book about boobs and bandit kings." Penelope noticed the spine of what Carver was holding. University of Ich-Kulan. It was on the Baidurid conquests of Africa and the fragmentation of Asian power on that continent. Fairly dry stuff for a 12-year-old. I don't want... This might be a hint about what Mr. Dearborn is going to talk about next semester in your history and civics class. Casey just put on a big pouty face. Carver turned to Penelope for the first time, set the book down on the table, right atop a breastbinder comic. "I'll take this one, please, Miss Humberton." Penelope blinked. $1.75. Carver produced a $2 coin. "Keep the change, dear. Come on, Miss Lennox, Miss Wang. We're burning daylight. Does anyone need to use the loo before we get back to the horses?" As Carver turned for the door, Penelope caught sight of the craftsmanship of that bow. Beautifully made. The name Kudalun carved into the wood in Mongolian script. And she knew Moxie knew how to use it. This was a master bowwoman. Penelope jumped up from her chair, scurried out from behind the table. Miss Carver," she called. The woman stopped in the entranceway. Penelope rushed to her, grabbing a publication on the way. Carver, over her shoulder, said, "Pay the grazing fee, Miss Dillashaw. I'll be there shortly." Meekly, she presented Carver with the booklet she'd grabbed. Moxie Breastbind in the Desert Spider, issue number 1. Carver didn't take it, looked at it like she was being presented with a used pair of underwear. "For Casey," she explained. "On the house, it's more age-appropriate than what she was looking at earlier." Carver sighed, opened up the African history textbook, and slipped the comic in between pages. "She's got enough of a potty mouth as it is, Penelope." "I know, I'm sorry. I'm sure she'll appreciate it. We'll wait until she passes her first test to give it to her," Carver said, waving the textbook to indicate the tough subject matter they were taught out there. "Listen, not to take up too much of your time," Penelope stuttered. "But, well, my cousin's taking over the shop for a little while, and, well..." A slight grin from Carver, the first sign of warmth the woman had shown since she'd appeared in the doorway. "Kelly tells me you're good with a bow. Real good. You'll do fine, mate." "My fingers bled for the first week," Penelope replied, blushing once more. "You guys are intense up at Darlot. I'm just... well, you hear stories." "Most of it's just stories," Carver cut in. "I can ride from here to Sydney and back, never see a bandit or a slaver or any..." She waved the book again. "Busty pirates." "And you don't believe in worms, do you?" It wasn't the slavers or the busty pirates that worried her. And no, it wasn't worms either. It wasn't even your average Joe Blow bandit. No, what worried her, what had given her a nightmare or two in the past week was... "He's dead," Carver cut in. She quickly clarified herself. I believe," she stressed, "that Pedro Kimbers is no longer with the living." That seemed to be the general consensus with everyone Penelope talked to. The last camel train that came in, she'd questioned everyone that would talk to her. She'd inquired with the various security firms in town and sent letters out to people she knew in Lenora, Laverton, Sir Samuel, and Painesville. They all reported the same thing. Banditry, when it happened, it was more desperate, disorganized, erratic. You didn't see whole trains vanish like they used to. You didn't see special agents from Perth or Alice Springs recovered in the desert, naked and wounded and traumatized. You didn't see raids on Carnarvon or Meekatharra with mass abductions of women and livestock. That's what people seem to believe, Carver added. Among traders like myself, it's what I believe. Kelly believes it. What do you think happened? Carver shrugged. Bandit kings, I take it, don't usually make it to their golden years. An ambitious lieutenant, one of his sub-commanders, rival warlord, who knows? Great, she grunted. No more united front. I just have to worry about thousands of rival bandit gangs. Carver smirked. I don't think it's thousands, mate. Look, you're only going to Geraldton, right? You'll be fine. Hey, make a killing, eh? Then Carver ducked out. No pat on the shoulder, no hug, hardly more than a gift card platitude. Carver was a cold woman, Penelope had learned. Maybe riding for days and weeks on end did that to you, or maybe it was just Carver. Penelope had formed friendships of sorts with the women out in Darlot in these past 2 months. They'd all warmed up to her. Kelly, Josephine, Ophelia, that young mum Emma, but Carver had always been distant. She's just like that, Josephine had told her one day, when she and Kelly were taking a protein shake pit stop after a hard morning of archery practice. Likes her space, her alone time. You understand, eh? Penelope took the hint. Most of the folks out here come from broken homes, or no homes at all. She dropped the subject. Not least because just then Aaron, the Adonis that had mixed them up a little protein powder with some goat's milk, had retrieved all the arrows they'd spent that morning and was dropping off full quivers for she and Kelly just then. Don't stare, Kelly had giggled. He gets that schoolgirl wet panty look all day long. Just offer to take him out for coffee in town. She had not, as it happened, tried to make a move. She told herself that it was because she was leaving on the next camel train. But in reality, she was much less curious about what a romp in the hay with Aaron was like than she was with Moxie Carver. Watching Carver jog after those girls, she looked back to the 2-adult comic book Casey Lennox would consume with glee when she was old enough to buy it herself, and wondered if Casey, if Eunice, if Sydney saw the same resemblance between Carver and Breastbind. 2 days later, her cousin Renee arrived in town. Renee, a woman who liked to avoid the saddle as much as humanly possible, practically limped into Penelope's lounge room after the 140k ride from Leonora. She was leaning on Johnson's arm all the way to the couch. "Penny!" Renee exclaimed, seeing her cousin come in from the kitchen. She whisked herself over and hugged her now sitting cousin, the two women kissing on each cheek. "Any trouble on the road?" "None at all," Renee applied as Penelope slipped back into the kitchen to fetch some water. "Your man Johnson here is all the protection a girl ever needs." Penelope poked her head back into the lounge room, cocked an eyebrow. There was something about the Renee had said that. Didn't ask. She returned with a tall glass of water, as well as 3 cups with some Eirig. Johnson said, as though giving a report, "All was clear, Mum. Not a single other soul on the road." She did wish she'd stopped calling her that. For Christ's sakes, he was a decade her senior. "Good to hear. We'll strike out north at sunrise tomorrow." He gave a nod of the head, exited without another word. Penelope sat down next to her cousin, took the cup of Eirig she'd poured for Johnson, and now divided it evenly between Renee's cup and her own. With Johnson gone, she asked her cousin, "You didn't shag him, did you?" "Do you really want me to answer that?" No, I don't." Although they corresponded every few weeks by letter, she hadn't actually seen her cousin since her mother's passing nearly 5 years ago, when Renee had made the trek up for the funeral. They chatted for a time, Penelope refilling their cups not too long into the conversation. "So we're going to get drunk tonight, right?" Renee asked. "What's the name of that pub we went to last time I came up? Really happening spot." "Kangaroos kicking the teeth," she replied. "But I can't get wrecked tonight. I have an early day tomorrow." "Oh, come on, you're only young once. Find some bloke to make you squeal, and you can take an energy drink in the morning." Penelope was shaking her head. Not happening. Kangaroos Kick these days is nothing but shitty bands playing screech chord and 19-year-olds that want to put in the back of beyond. Too bad. I mean, a lay's a lay, Even if it's A. But that Screech style is just shite. Like nails on a chalkboard. No other good places around town? No, betting houses and an amateur nudie bar, but nothing else I'd show my face in. In truth, it wasn't just that she had a 50k ride tomorrow. This sort of thing was behind her now. She hadn't been out to the Kangaroo's Kick in over a year, and the few times she'd had people over for drinks, she'd still turned in early. Up at Lake Darlot, when she stayed overnight, and Kelly or Josephine would break out a bottle of ours, she was a lightweight that nursed it and yawned into the twilight hours as the others chatted well into the night. The days of getting blind drunk and singing karaoke, or of waking up to find a folded sheet of paper with a random bloke's name and address slipped into her bra, were a thing of the past. No, right now, she was much more interested in her business. Someone of her age, she was already leagues ahead of most of her peers, and it was precisely because she'd given up on the drinking and partying, woke before dawn every day, busted her ass, and took risks. It wasn't just the bookshop. That was a storefront booth at the market. Rent was dirt cheap, and anyone could sell old romance novels. You don't make much money off those. And nor do you on the university press history tomes, because no one buys them except Kobe's community up at Darlot. Even the comics were not going to earn her quids, because 4 other shops sold the same stuff within a stone's throw of her own. No, she'd make a name for herself producing the comics. She wasn't a writer, she wasn't an illustrator, but she knew how to make introductions to do that legwork. That's what this trip was all about, setting herself up in distribution. She explained some of this to her cousin, showed Renee some of the recent work Mulholland had put together. "Who is Jurian John?" Renee asked. "It's a pen name," she said with a wave. "Everyone uses it." "But how's this bloke Mulholland? Or you, for that matter, supposed to get your name out there if you're calling yourself Jurian John?" She didn't want to mention the S word, sedition. The Breastbinder comics had been popular for little less than a year now, with 5 issues that she had definitely placed in the canon of Jurian John, the real one, and more than a dozen other artists all using the same name. Word had come in, maybe 5 months ago, that a prefectural Kurultai had ruled that the Breastbinder comics were seditious under the law. In an interpretation of the Imperial Yasa, they were classed as anti-government propaganda, no different than disseminating flyers calling for an open rebellion, or publicly threatening the life of an official. Never mind that, on the very day this Kurultai convened, one of the Jurian John imitators released the first issue in a multi-issue arc wherein Moxie goes after Pedro Kimbers, who in reality is, or was, a much greater threat to the Hulagu regime than a comic book wench who straps down her boobs. Moxie Breastbind and the Duke of the Desert proved to be horribly popular, and with her ears to the ground, she heard about no one being arrested for it. Indeed, it seemed no one was arrested under that legal interpretation for any Moxie comic, and she'd soon resume selling them at her shop. Producing and distributing them, however, was a different story. Her cousin seemed ignorant about this legal limbo, however, and Penelope decided it was best not to trouble her with it. She turned over her key to Renee. "Store opens at 8 a.m. every day. If you need to step out for lunch or you're going to be sick, talk to Helen Richmond. She runs the mutton cart next door. She'll watch over the place for you. Prices are marked, you can haggle a little bit, but don't give the stuff away." Renee was nodding impatiently. All of this had been covered in Penelope's last letter. Renee cut in and said, "Harry Davidson will have a crate of new books on the 30th of March. Don't haggle with him, because he's not going to try and stick me." "And what books don't you buy from him?" "Those ones about former prime ministers moonlighting as vampire falconers." She smiled. "I'll be back in 2 months. I hope you've packed a skimpy swimsuit. You better spend 3 or 4 days plastered on the beach. You come back without bikini tan lines and so help me." Penelope hugged her cousin. "I love you, cuz. I'm totally banging hot guys in your bed while you're gone. You know that, right?" "I'd already planned on holding back your pay until a thorough laundry job when I get back," she smirked. Then she added, "Oh, one more thing. There's this girl, 12 years old. Her name's Lennox. Kinda reminds me of myself at that age. If she comes in, give her half price on any of the Breastbinder comics. Just make sure they're not filled with orgies and this chick doesn't have a map of Tassie on every second page." "In as many words," she nodded. The following day, as Renee slept soundly, Penelope snuck out just before dawn, silently latching the door behind her. Johnson, she found, was already waiting for her, and had brought a couple of horses from the local leasing agency, saddled and draped in saddlebags. The camel train bound for Geraldton wasn't leaving for another 2 days. It was scheduled to arrive around 10 a.m. this morning, spend the remainder of the day unloading, and tomorrow reload with products westbound. She already had her spot booked, and a spare bedroom full of boxes she planned to ship. There was, however, a little bit of a last-minute inventory she needed to secure. She and Johnson rode hard. There were 4 horses between the two of them, and they swapped out the remounts when needed. She had a little under 50 kilometers to cover before the end of the day, on top of which she'd have to inspect the inventory and have it bound in plastic and twine. At sunrise tomorrow, her 2-man caravan would have to repeat the ride, this time in reverse, and make it back to Leinster with enough time for her to get some shut-eye and to load her cart on the train. There were deadlines here, and the camels would not wait. Things would be a little grueling between now and then, and she didn't expect it to be any easier once the train departed. But this is what she'd signed up for, and it was this sort of hard work that would see her triple her profits by this time next year. "Not so much as a bilby in sight, Mum," declared Johnson, sweeping left and right with his telescope. They were on a ridge that provided a good natural vantage point, and she wanted to be sure they were alone on this road. She had her recurved bow with her, the one she'd bought from Kobe's Traders for the discounted price of $450. Yet she was still leery. Last night she'd had another nightmare about desert bandits. Dreamt she was on a camel halfway to Geraldton, got slammed in the chest by a rubber arrow, was dragged, kicking and screaming to the gertrig of a buff man with the head of a black panther, who eyed her hungrily. She was locked in a dog cage, trying to cover her sudden nakedness, and the gertrig rocked back and forth, riding north into the deep desert. Kimbers, the moon panther, Wormslayer, Sandstorm. These were names that were always on the forefront of her mind when she rode north to see Mulholland. She sucked back a gulp of water from her flagon. "Aye, let's keep moving." Johnson Ramos was her only employee, though at this point he was really more of a business partner. Although she'd been brushing up on her archery lately, she still wouldn't dare venture outside Leinster city limits without him. The man had been all over the world, running protection jobs in places like Burma and Tibet. Originally from Europe, he'd left for the open frontier, as he put it, though she suspected there was more to the story than that. She paid him on contract, but there'd been more than one occasion when she'd been short and had to make it up later. He never complained, and she'd been generous with cutting him in on percentages and the runs he'd made to Lenora and Laverton to deliver Mulholland's prints. By 4 in the afternoon, the Mulholland ranch was visible on the horizon, and they rode through the gates not 20 minutes later. Mrs. Mulholland met them on the front porch, walking over to the watering station where they hitched their horses. "Miss Humberton, right on schedule!" she exclaimed. "I endeavour to stick to my timetables, Dana," she replied. "How have you been? Any more dingo troubles?" "Oh, our camels just spit at those vermin and scare them off. It's the young ones that are the target, but we've had no issues. Mr. Ramos, how are you, sir? Let me get the two of you some water. No troubles on the road, I take it." Dana Mulholland led them into the main house, where a pitcher of cool water already awaited them. Passing by the basement door, she called down to her son with an impatient shout, then immediately returned to that lovely demeanour. "Did your cousin get in safely, dear?" Ashland Mulholland came bounding up the stairs. That peach fuzz on his upper lip didn't appear to have grown any further since the last time Penelope had been up here. He was wearing an oversized t-shirt and tracky dacks, his hair a mess, and he hadn't put on deodorant in at least a few days. Ash immediately bumped fists with Johnson, who was standing just next to the basement door. "J.R., mate, how you been?" "Master Mulholland," chirped Johnson, grinning at the boy. "Nell, darling, looking fine as always." "Oh, you know how to steal a girl's heart," Penelope replied sardonically. "The last run just needs staples. Come, come." Downstairs there were stacks of bundled comic books, some already in plastic and twine, some loosely assembled awaiting their packaging. The press was in the center of the room, the plates he'd inked stacked at the side. Ash scurried to the wooden table next to the press, shuffled some pages together with his hands, slipped them under the stapler. She was a partial owner of all of this equipment, purchased mostly with money her mum had left her. She'd sat on it for a while, shifting it around in local investments, settling some debts, paid the back taxes on her house. There wasn't much in the way of business in Leinster, and for a time she'd even considered striking out for Kalgoorlie or Perth. But then she'd found a then 17-year-old kid selling what he'd hand-drawn at a convention just north of town, and the rest, well, the rest would soon be history. "Issues 5 and 6, he said, handing her the copies of the newest installments of the Mad Con's Menagerie. She wanted to act businesslike, but in reality, she was dying to see what Moxie was going to do next. In issue number 4, she just infiltrated Illugi's harem, gotten, cozy with some of the concubines, and learned that Chagatai's offensive was closing in fast. Casually, she flipped through the first few pages. It looked as though Illugi, in his mad paranoia, was checking the enlistment records of his concubines. She switches names with another wench, and the other girl's raped by a horse, Ash said. He loved spoiling the story for her. She bit her lip and glared at him, taking a breath. She said, "You're not showing horse rape in here, are you?" "Just the horse grinning devilishly. There's no cock shots." "Good," she declared. "I do have certain standards. And by the way, the detail on the breast is immaculate. But could you just dial it back a touch? I've had 12-year-old girls flipping through these things." Ash shrugged. "Hey, I'm selling these to you, a 21-year-old woman. Who you sell them to is your problem." Penelope was 25. Ash thought he had a lot more charm than he actually did. Johnson had set to work packaging the loose comics near the stairs. Penelope, now that the story had been spoiled for her, did a random flip-through, taking in the art. The kid had some talent. "Hey, look at this," he said, excited, running to a box against the wall. He pulled out another comic and handed it to her. "Moxie Breastbind and the Sydney Slattern. New series? Blimey, do you do nothing but draw?" "Not mine," he said, pointing at the name on the cover, Jury and John. "They misspelt it," she said. Jon. "Comes from out east," he said, grinning like a fool. "Sydney, maybe. I'm told there's a couple of these out there. That's how they spell them." Christ, did this spread to the East Coast? She felt a little excited at that. She had her stake claimed in a franchise that was now interprefectual. She started flipping through it. It's about this high-class whorehouse in Sydney, with girls disappearing because of some noble that can make things disappear. Brush 'em under the rug. Don't spoil it, you bastard! And the madam works out a deal with our scantily clad pirate assassin. She bit her lip. "You really are an asshole, you know that." He beamed. "I managed to snag 6 of them." "Only 6? I could sell 24 of these things in Leinster alone." "They weren't cheap either. Take them to the convention, put a collector's price tag on them." Damn it, he was right. These would sell, and she could sell them for a good profit. But it would mean her own bookshelf would not contain a copy. She'd have to read it during the trip, carefully as not to crease the pages. "Is that a recurved?" he suddenly asked, reaching out to touch the bow slung over her shoulder, stepping into her personal space. She knew he had a bit of a crush on her. Actually, she kind of thought it was sweet. She slipped the bow off herself. "Don't so much as pull the string," she said. "This thing's worth more than your dad's most prized camel." He looked it over, inspecting every curve. Finding the princess's name, he frowned. "Temelin," she said, translating the Mongol script. "The young princess." He nodded, as if he'd known what it said all along. "Where'd you get it?" "Some friends," she replied. "Brushed up on how to use it. A girl's got to take care of herself on the road." She had not, wisely, she believed, told Kelly or the others up at Darlot the exact nature of her business trip to Geraldton. Yes, they knew she sold books, and they knew she was rather fond of comics. What she'd told them was that she knew a guy that made rip-off Black Fox comics. This was technically true, but far from the whole picture. One's business is one's own. "How about Khan versus Caesar?" she asked. Still looking at the bow, he motioned for a stack of 5 or 6 booklets on the far side of the table. "Had those packed up a week ago." She walked around the table to look at one, issue number 6. She read these ones too, but less voraciously. The Black Fox just wasn't as appealing as the Breastbinder. He came over, gently setting down her bow as she flipped through the first few pages. The inking on these was pristine, the black and whites coming to life with his contrasts. He looked at her expectantly, like a puppy dog. She shut the book and smiled at him, took her hand and roughed up his hair. "This is good work, Ashley." He hated that name, and went red as soon as she'd said it. "Cut it out," he whined. She sniggered. "Johnson, pay the man. We'll load these up before dawn tomorrow and be on our way at first light." "I don't know how you wake up so early," Ash grunted. "Ashley here can help us load the saddlebags," she smirked. "What did I tell you about that name? How'd you like it if I came up with a nickname for you based off your lemon crush on Miss Breastbind?" "All right, calm down," she said, still grinning. "We do have to make time tomorrow. We've got a train to catch. You should be proud, Ashley. In a few weeks' time, your stuff will be up for sale all up and down the coast." He crossed his arms, which didn't quite look right on his thin frame. "Nell, love, you know just what to tell a man to make 'em all warm and fuzzy. How about a kiss, darling?" She smiled. He stood there, his lips puckered. She leaned in and planted a little peck on his cheek. "Rest up, Ashley. You're helping load this up in the morning." "Listen, someone needs to point me in the direction of Roland Erickson," she snarled. The camel next to her, which towered above her, bellowed at the same time she said it, drowning out everything she was trying to say. It also started urinating right there where it stood, and she took a step away. "I don't know any Erickson," replied the sec man she was talking to. "Maybe he's up that way." That way was a line of more than 60 camels. She'd already sent Johnson down looking for her contact, didn't really fancy blindly striking out herself. "Where's the supervisor?" she demanded on the security agent. He just laughed. "Listen, sweet pea, I've got a final sweep I need to do." "Why, you asshole, you could suck a big bag of I think I can help you," cut in a new voice. She turned to her left. An Asian man, somewhere in his 20s, stood there. He offered his hand. "Name's Motoon." "Penelope," she said, letting out her breath. She shook his hand. "I'm told Mr. Erickson is near cart 35. I have to check in myself." "Thank you. Finally someone that seems to not have their head up their ass." "I have a feeling this is my cart here," Motoon said, motioning to a cart not far off. "But it's my first trip, and I want to make sure." "Your first trip? Like 2 peas in a pod. Same for me. Where are you from?" "Laverton." They found Roland Erickson right where Motoon said he would be, at cart 35. He was astride a horse, with a clipboard in his hand. He was a well-built man, with salt and pepper stubble, and piercing eyes. She'd never met the man before, had booked her spot through the local agency. "Humberton?" "Yeah, I got you here somewhere," he grunted, with a gravelly voice. "Upton, you got the tail section with you?" A rough-looking woman in her middle 30s came over, swerving her horse into line. She had her hair shaven over the one ear, just like Moxie wears in the comics, and she had an eye patch covering her left eye. "Aye," she said, scanning her clipboard with her good eye. After a moment she snorted, "Card 89. Your security contract is Caverfield. And you, sir?" Motoon. I'm moving. Cart 87, same sec agent." And with that, she swerved her horse back to the other side, to a group of others 5 or so meters off. "It looks like we're going to be neighbors," Motoon said. "It seems that way," said Penelope. The two guided their horses back towards the tail end of the train. "What are you selling?" Motoon asked. "Books," she replied. "Going for the convention in Geraldton. Yourself?" He sold bits of leatherwork, as it turned out. Saddles, quivers, blade sheaths, boots, and the like. They struck up a conversation as they rode back towards their assigned carts. They were indeed neighbors, and it turned out their security contact was the bloke who earlier had been rude with Penelope about who and where Erickson was. She had 2 of her horses with her, and set to work loading the cart. It was much more utilitarian than she'd imagined. A simple frame on 4 wheels, with just enough room to pack in her boxes and packages, and drape a tarpaulin over. You get what you paid for, she figured. Motoon's cart, by contrast, had high walls and a deeper frame, enough to facilitate his bulkier leather products. She had to pull her wares out after they were halfway loaded and reconfigure to get everything to fit. Her neighbor, thankfully, was quite friendly, and came over to give her a hand once his own was loaded. "Ah, Johnson," she called, seeing her associate ride up with the other horses. "Very good, Mum. I see you found your station. It took me forever to find Mr. Erickson." "Give me a hand with this one," she said, approaching the one horse. "Then you can return the others before we depart." The camel train departed at 11 a.m. on the dot. Penelope had been ready for it, though there was more than one person who was still struggling to batten down their tarp when the whistle sounded. They'd kept one horse on lease, which Johnson rode alongside her cart, providing security, although with Caverfield and his agency it was perhaps unnecessary. Penelope herself sat in the front of the cart, nominally driving the camel, though the beasts were quite content to just follow submissively. Lunch was served at 1 p.m., one of Ericsson's lackeys riding back boxes of dried mutton and a rural cheese, which she forced herself to choke down. It was the same for dinner, which didn't come until around 7. By that point, the sun had set and they were calling it end of the day. The entire thing was so wretchedly uncouth. She'd known the camel train culture would be vulgar, had been told as much by anyone who'd have but a whiff of it. Kelly Conlon had warned her of the brashness of it. "It's all so very male," the woman had said. "Everything you see, everything you hear, everything you smell." It was certainly true. Her afternoon had been filled with the sight of men pissing off the side of their carts, conversations that included the pig-like squeals women made during a screw, and body hair. It was 10 or 20 to 1, male to female here, and the women that were here, like Upton, the one-eyed lease organizer, were even more crude than their cohorts. The gentleman in cart 88, in between Motoon and herself, his name was Hagar, was on his way west trying to sell erotic nudes, as he called them, canvas after canvas of them. She took this for a euphemism that it was, porn, and he tried to be chivalrous and spare her eyes from it. She laughed and told him about magazines she was selling, but didn't press him. Caverfield, on the other hand, the sack man assigned to that segment of the train, asked for a look, and Penelope overheard him commenting, "Tits on that one are sweet as 89. "Let 'em talk about the train tramps and the nudie bars," Kelly had told her. "Hurts nothing. Better conversation than camel snorting, believe you me." They stopped to pitch camp about 45 minutes or so after sunset. Caverfield gathered together all of those under his charge, explained to them how night security would work. Ericsson's men eventually made their way down the line to tend to the camels. With that her rule in her belly, and the excitement of finally striking out past that back of beyond nexus that was Leinster, she couldn't sleep. The experience, she found, was not a unique one. There was a lively nightlife among the campfire. Springers sang up, guitar chords and drums could be heard in the distance. Alcohol was suddenly everywhere, and the general din of conversation filled the atmosphere. Prostitutes, too, were about. They seemed to spring up from the sand and descend upon the carts and makeshift campsites. One of them approached Johnson as he lay out his sleeping bag, and then turned to Penelope when she was turned down. "Would you like some comfort for a time, my lady?" Hagar showed up with a little bottle in hand and invited Johnson and herself to a little celebration around his campfire. Motoon, she found, was there as well, as was a man named Jameson and 2 brothers, Hector and Louis Heritage, one of whom wore a crucifix and acted just a bit too religious for Penelope's taste. Hagar, a gruff man in need of a shave and missing one of his front teeth, which caused him to whistle when he spoke, uncorked a bottle of Caracamis and said, "To new ventures." It was cheap Caracamis. Passing it around, she took a sip. It went down with a burn, but she didn't shy away. An hour later, she was a little tipsy, but then so was everyone. "So Johnson, my man," exclaimed Hagar, putting his arm around him. "How is Europe? Is there still nuclear perimeters around Paris and London?" Johnson had held back on his drinking, as he was nominally still on duty, though he had had a few, and had loosened up considerably from his usual uptightness. "London there is, but the fencing is in disrepair, and many people don't worry too much about the fallout these days. It's been nearly 80 years. Penelope was hit with sudden exhaustion, the drink colliding with everything she'd put out in the past few days. But she was enjoying herself still, didn't want this night to end just yet. Motoon shuffled over closer to her. "You gonna make it?" he asked. "I've still got heaps of energy," she declared with a yawn. "I don't doubt it," he replied with a smile. "I'm sure you could run the gamut. Gymnastic martial arts and an eye patch in your underwear." She smirked. "Someone told you that's a mainstay of my cargo, didn't they?" she said, eyeing Johnson, who was deep in conversation with Hagar on the other side of the fire. "I must admit I'm a bit of a fan myself. There's one series that's popular in Laverton I followed all the way through, The Admiral's Ashes." "I've read that one. I even have a few in my cart." The warmth of the fire on her face, the Caracamis in her belly, she leaned against him, rested her head on his shoulder. "Can I ask you a question? You name for the Noyan or the Shong-Nu?" He was chuckling before she finished. She playfully shoved him in the shoulder. "At least you got Noyan right. Is it Zeong-Nu?" "You're adorable," he said, putting his arm around her. That was reassuring, comforting. He felt the same way about her that she brought her head up, looked him in the eye. Tried not to bite her lip. She was never any good at this. She leaned in. A shrill wail shook them both, and they jumped where they sat. His head was darting back and forth. Johnson was up and lunging for his bow. She discovered she had her hand on her own as well. The wail came again, louder now, and as soon as her ears stopped ringing, she heard horses now too. She was on her feet. Torches could be seen in the distance, bouncing back and forth as riders charged. Caverfield suddenly charged past her cart, and the air horn he blew was so piercing she had to hold her ears. Once the ringing had stopped, all she could hear was a pounding, a rapid beating. Horses everywhere. No, her own heart pounding in her ears, blood surging through her veins bulging beneath her skin, her lungs on overdrive. She knew what those air horns were for. Caverfield had explained earlier. The agency had explained when she booked her cart. Kimbers, she whispered, her lungs barely able to let out that single breath. It was pandemonium around their campsite. The camels were spooked with the horns and the torches waving this way and that. Sand was being thrown on campfires. People were running for their carts. Caverfield and other Seckmen were yelling something. Hagar was shouting something about protocols and procedures. Johnson was yelling at her. She blinked, forced herself to breathe. "Mum," Johnson demanded, more forceful than she'd ever heard him. "You need to get in the cart. Cover yourself in the tarp. Don't come out until I say." This was all true, she knew. Standard procedure, common sense. Women and children are under the carts, beneath the water tankers, under tarps. As still and silent as the grave. Mothers had smothered newborns to keep them from wailing when bandits were near. But she didn't listen. She blinked more than once, cut off her hired security. "My bow!" It was in her hand. Of course it was. She pulled an arrow. No, pulled 4. Pinched 3 in the other hand to have it ready. She wasn't about to hide like a child under the blanket. Johnson held his bow half drawn. She stepped out beside him and looked into the darkness off the road. "Miss Penelope, with respect, you can't even hold that thing straight." It was true, she was shaking, but she would not be upon a fate. "I'm not hiding," she declared. Caverfield swerved his horse in front of the two of them, a desperate whinny from the animal. She nearly fired into it, killed the horse beneath him. "Wench, get to cover," the Sec man commanded. "Outlaws will chew a bitch like you up before you can call rape her," he snarled. Her eyes darted to the cart, 15 or so meters away. No need to be the hero, she thought. There was no demand for her to grow a set and stand there on the front lines to face what was out there. She could just dash off to the cart. "I can fire a goddamn bow," she snarled at Caverfield. "You want to keep rapers away from me? How's about you focus on the fucking darkness?" It was blacker than pitch out there. Infernal desert. She hated the fucking desert. Should have moved to Perth long ago. Nothing out in the sand but dry air, bandit regimes, and raper kingdoms. She couldn't hear anything. Anything, that is, but the stampede in her chest. Her mouth was as dry as could be, but her nerves were still as twitchy as hell, and she could barely keep Temulan straight. She hoped this instinct crock Kelly kept talking about would kick in. The desert lit up. A flare launched. Maybe a half-kilometer into the dark, sailing high into the sky. Then she heard the echo of a voice out there. A bullhorn. Mongolian. It was in Mongolian. She spoke a handful of words. She could ask where the restroom was, and thank a server for her meal, knew how to swear. But she didn't understand that much of it. Caverfield quickly pulled his bow up, released the tension on his arrow. "Stand down," he called, his voice bellowing. "Stand down," he called again. "Military! They're military! Bitch, put your fucking bow down!" It took her a second to realize that it was for her. She blinked, quickly aimed down to the dirt, didn't release the tension. Caverfield charged off his horse, still shouting to stand down. Penelope let out her breath to such a degree that she almost collapsed. To Johnson, she said, "You speak Mongolian, don't you?" "Yes, Mum. They do claim to be military. Keep on your guard, though, in case it's a ruse." It was not a ruse. They were indeed military. Within the hour, the two parties had crossed each other's courses without incident. She left Johnson to confer with Caverfield, and returned to her cart where she wrapped herself in a blanket. Motoon, too, was there, offering his comfort, his arm around her shoulder. There was her pants stayed on. Not that she'd necessarily had plans to take them off. There weren't even any kisses. That moment was long gone now. For the time being, she just enjoyed his embrace. She did not sleep well that night. Her nerves were shot. lying wide awake in her sleeping bag. Every little thing she thought she heard or saw, out there in that black, made her shiver. She told herself it was nothing, the great bandit empire was broken. But still, her eyes could not shut, her mind could not rest. It would all be worth it, she hoped, expand her market. Get this one under her belt and she'd be set. Kalgoorlie in 6 months' time. The Perth Convention this time next year. These are the things she told herself as she struggled to sleep. Over the course of the next week, things got better. Sleeping got easier. The jerky and the cheese got easier. Dealing with the camels got easier. The nights got easier. She and Johnson finished lunch. 8 days now into setting out, as she carefully flipped through the issue of the Sydney Slattern, that East Coast knockoff she'd have to part ways with in Geraldton. It was the second time she'd read it. She sat on the cart while Johnson rode beside her on his horse. "Well, I never quite tire of our rule," Johnson said, finishing his last bite. "The first thing I'll be eating in Geraldton is a nice fresh piece of pizza." "Don't start talking about food," she pestered, not looking up from the comic. "And I'll be putting my feet in the ocean, walk across that beach barefoot, feel the coolness of the water. Nothing out here but sand and dry air." He put his hand up to shade his eyes, peered out across the landscape. She took that as her chance while he was distracted, took her flagon and chugged, forcing the water down. She forced herself to swallow that last little bit, her stomach full. "Johnson," she said. He looked over. "Would you be a dear and refill my flagon?" "Of course, Mum. It's important to keep your fluids up out here." He took it from her and pushed his horse forward. She slammed the comic shut and leapt off the side of the cart. He'd have to go all the way up to cart 44 to get that refilled. And with the way these camels now spaced themselves out, that tanker was a fair ride away. Plus, it was still lunch hour, and he'd find himself in a lineup. He'd be gone for a bit, but you still have to act fast. She climbed up the side step of Motun's carriage, barged in on him. He was fixing a bit of stitching on a purse strap. His head jerked up at the intrusion. "Penelope, She stepped forward, planted her lips on him. At first he was confused, hesitant. But it wasn't long before his tongue was flicking against her lips. His arm was around her. "I want you," she whispered. Kissed him again. "Is that okay? Do you want that too?" His hand was up her shirt. She wasn't wearing a bra. Calloused fingers were on her. Shivers went through her. She'd have collapsed if he hadn't been holding on to her. "Have you," he asked, a little awkward, "have you got, I wasn't really expecting this when I planned this trip." He didn't have. Crikey, men usually had these things. She hadn't brought one. And she didn't plan on getting knocked up on the road. She was fumbling at his belt, felt his stiffness through his underwear. He pushed her back, lowered her down to the floor. It wasn't the ideal place to make love, but a good part of her didn't care just then. "We have to be quick, right?" he asked, half on top of her. "Don't want the guys to know?" She nodded. "We can be quick," he said. He was kissing her neck, fumbling at her belt. Her zipper was down, his hand into her underwear. She was so aroused that just a gentle touch had her gasp. He was rubbing, gently, but he knew what he was doing. He kissed her collarbone. His other hand was pawing at her breast. Her fingers were splayed, her palm pressed hard into the floor. She took her left hand and put it on his, guiding him. Her right, the fingernails now digging into the floorboards. She went reaching down for him, but he was too far down. She wanted to touch him, to have him in her hand, to have him in... She could only imagine what Renee would say if she could see this. She could only imagine what Ash would say, what Kelly would say. Josephine had warned her about this. "Don't go screwing blokes on the road," the trader had said. "You'll get a reputation about you, and have a dozen others forming a queue. A lady must hold herself to higher standards than a train tramp on the road." Kelly had just smirked. "Shagging one or two ain't gonna hurt you." "Don't give her bad advice, you slut," snorted Josephine, before both women broke out laughing. She didn't want to think about train tramps and celibacy advice right now. She wanted to think about lips on her clavicle, and the hand stroking her, and the urgent need to grind back into him. She couldn't take it anymore. She ripped open the front of her shirt, a button going somewhere, exposed her chest to him. "Suck," she wheezed. He took the nipple, teased it with the same touch as down below. The other hand was pawing at the other one. Her own hand found his again, guided, tightened his grip. More, she whispered. The way he worked those lips, she was going to blow it right there in the front of her underwear. Quit teasing me and Idigan's tits, I'm gonna... The sound of the air horn wrenched her out of that blissful moment, wrenched her off the floor of the carriage. Motoon was on his feet in the same instant. Her bow! Where was her goddamn bow? She saw it by the door, lunged for it as she did up her zipper. It's broad daylight, muttered Motoon. Another false bloody alarm. You wait and see, she grumbled, doing up her buttons. She wasn't about to count on it, though, and was out the door before she'd barely put her belly button away. Her buttons! Umai's womb. She'd lost 2 of them. The alarm had not been raised since that first night. They'd encountered 2 other parties on the road in that time, yet those riders clearly made themselves known before the air horns blared. Erickson, after that first night with the military party intersecting their own path, reassured everyone that horns are almost never blown, save when approachers appear from out in the desert. My past 5 runs, we haven't had a single horn, he said. But military's military, and they don't care to give the camel trains wide berths. She hit the road running, her bow in hand. She could see Caverfield 10 carts or so up, his horse in a panic once more. Mum, get yourself to cover. It was Johnson, who flew in from the other side of the train. She ignored him, scanned the horizon, a flat hand shading her eyes. Do you see anything? She demanded. Negative, he replied. Mr. Erickson was barking something about a figure in the distance. Horse? Camel? I don't know, Mum, you should really get in. Caverfield appeared on his horse, the animal whinnying like mad once more. He had a spyglass in his hand, was scanning the horizon. She shouted at the man. What is it? He peeled his eye off the lens and glared at her. She realized where his gaze was going, pinched shut the hem of her shirt where those 2 buttons went missing. A girl can't get her rocks off around here without everyone knowing? He returned to the spyglass without a word. She let her collar flap in the wind once more, and returned hands to bow, this time with an arrow. After a second, Caverfield pulled the spyglass from his eye, and picked up the bullhorn hanging around his neck. Bellowing forward on the train, he shouted, I have one! Tail section, on foot! Heavy cloak! She couldn't see shit. She squinted in the direction Caverfield was pointing a spyglass, but there was nothing there. Johnson, what do you see? She demanded. Johnson had his own eyepiece, a set of binoculars which he was peering through. He's right, Mum. Single cloaked figure, good distance off. Could it be a trap? Diversion? Send 1 man in on foot to distract from a raiding party further forward on the train? Possibly, Mum, impossible to say. You really should get yourself to hide. Give me the binoculars. You work the bow, she commanded, once more pinching the hem of her shirt. He tossed them down to her, and she put them to her eyes. He's in a run, now, bellowed Caverfield. She found him, the bandit, the figure. Heavy cloak, a hood. Tattered rags, more like. Slender hands were the only skin seen, halfway up in a surrender expression. He was running, yes, toward them, but it wasn't a sprint. He was indeed alone. Another Sekman appeared on horseback alongside Erickson. Get him in your sights, Caver, said this Sekman. He now took up the bullhorn, bellowed out in the desert. You there! We have you in our sights. We are prepared to fire. Penelope put her eyes back on the binoculars. The figure had not slowed in his approach. In fact, it looked as though he'd increased in speed. The security captain repeated himself, this time in Mongolian. Penelope continued to observe. No change. The guy was indeed in a tattered patchwork of a cloak, practically shreds at the legs. There was a flagon she saw, strung over one shoulder, but by the way it was bouncing and flailing as the figure ran, it was clearly empty. The arms, slender white arms, were waving lazily. It's a woman, she said. What? Barked Erickson. You will stop where you are or we'll open fire. She's a woman, she repeated. Look how slender she is. Look at the way she moves. Desert bandits tend to be quite thin, Caverfield said, not taking his eye off his mark. Mr. Quinn, I don't want my camel train to be gunning down women on the roadside. He could just as easily be a man, the security captain replied. I see tits, goddammit, she barked. Indeed, the way the cloak clung to the front of her, with her arms up, you could see the shape of the female form. She could be just some rider. Horse broke a leg, stranded in the desert. She needs our help, not an arrow in her chest. Where's her security? The man named Quinn retorted. No wench rides the desert alone. The more Penelope observed this woman, the more it became clear that this was not a banditry ploy. This was a woman in need of aid. Maybe it was her soft heart. But she didn't want to see security that was ostensibly there for her protection, executing some poor woman in need of water. "Mr. Quinn," insisted Erickson. "You're going to tell me her sec team was taken by a worm," snapped the security captain. "Mr. Quinn," Erickson cut in, more forcefully this time. "When my organization contracted your agency, you want to break out the contract," snorted Quinn. "It'll clearly say that security is our purview and its enforcement is at our discretion. You put an arrow on that woman, and we find no weapons on her and no bandits as far as the eye can see, and I'll see to it your agency will never work a camel train again. You'll be the doorman at Geraldton Whorehouse before—" "God fucking damn it," grumbled Quinn. He took the bullhorn and bellowed into it, "Remove your hood or we will open fire." He got 2 words into the same command in Mongolian when the woman stopped, flipped down her hood. She was indeed a woman. A girl, really, no older than Penelope herself. Long dark hair, a slender white face. She was mouthing something, calling to them. Penelope could see in the binoculars. She looked like a desperate woman stranded in the desert, begging for help, begging for mercy. Quinn grunted. "All right, Mr. Catherfield. We proceed with caution. I'll go left, you go right. Give her a wide berth. Keep your bow about you. Any funny business, don't hesitate. Hesitation is death, understand?" "I'm coming with you," Penelope demanded. "Not a chance in hell, wench," spat Quinn. "You're going to get your ass to your cart, and if you so much as fall off of it, I'll consider you outside of my purview, do you understand?" He was furious, she could see, and part of her was kowtowed to submission with his command. She bit her lip, turned on her heel, stepped up to Johnson's horse. "Johnson, it might have something to do with your, cleavage, Mom." She grabbed at her shirt again, whispered to him, "Crikey, a girl can't get a hand job around here without getting the 3rd degree." She'd never seen his dark face go so red before. "You go with them, keep them honest, eh?" "Aye, Mum." She returned to her cart, found herself a new shirt, let out a deep breath, and for the first time, noticed the shakiness of her hands, her fingers. This woman could still be some part of a bandit ploy, she realized. Her body was telling her this. Catherfield, Quinn, Johnson, these were capable men, she told herself. They could handle themselves if outlaws were lying in wait. But bandits can come right out of the sand like worms, can't they? Or is this just something in comics and tall tales? "Hey!" She nearly jumped. It was Motoon, standing beside her cart. "Hey," she said, calming herself. "Saw how you handle yourself with those sec men," he said, a little awkward. "They can be intimidating as hell." She nodded, herself a little awkward. "Yeah, that's for sure. Look, I'm all shaky." "You can really hold your own." She shrugged. "Well, I try. Don't want to see an innocent woman shot and killed because 2 testosterone junkies are trigger happy." He broke eye contact, took a step towards her. "Sorry, everyone kind of knows, about—" "Hey, I'm the one that ripped my buttons." She felt her face warming. "That air horn had to be blown just then, eh?" "Of course." Then there was a moment of silence that hung between them. A long moment. The camel groaned, breaking the awkwardness for about half a second. Then they both spoke at once. "Well, so—" They both cut each other off, paused, and another moment of awkwardness transpired. She hadn't been with a man in— Christ, she didn't want to think about it. Since her mother's passing and the heavy focus on business, the chance she took investing in that printing press, she'd been busy, had made herself busy. And now she didn't know hardly how to talk to a bloke. "Go ahead," he said. "Well," she said, stumbling a bit in her words, "I was thinking, since everyone— maybe later on I could— Mum!" It was Johnson, riding up at a fast clip. "They need a woman's touch. Erickson's cart, Mum. The girl. She claims to be a bandit survivor." Erickson's cart was large. Situated in the middle of the train, it required 2 large Bactrian camels to pull it, and the beasts didn't look all that pleased they'd been selected for the honor. There was a queen bed inside, along with a desk and several boxes of files, locked cabinets on the rear wall. As soon as Penelope entered, she heard, "All right, let's get these dicks out of here." It was Upton. She stood about halfway back the carriage. The girl, in her tattered cloak, sat on the bed. Upton was waving her hands at Quinn, Catherfield, Erickson, and 2 other men Penelope didn't recognize. "Titties only," declared Upton. "Humberton, right? You stay. Everyone else, give this woman some space." Reluctantly, the men, including Johnson, exited. Penelope stepped to the side as they did so, unsure of what to say or how to react. "Leave the door unlocked," said Quinn. "Close the door, Humberton," said the organizer. Upton went to the bed, sat down next to the girl, giving her a good amount of personal space. "Dear, you're in good hands now. Back to civilization. My name's Marie. This is Penelope. I'm a central organizer in this camel train. We're officially licensed en route to Geraldton. Penelope is a businesswoman. She's the one that insisted our security team was cordial to you. Do you need some more water, dear?" The girl nodded. "Please." She was gaunt, timid, heavy bags under her eyes. You could smell days or weeks' worth of sweat on her. But she wasn't ugly. Give her a comb and a shower, a few days' rest, she might actually be quite pretty, Penelope thought. Silently, Upton took the flagon on the bed between the two women, turned, and filled it from the barrel Ericsson kept in there. The girl put it to her lips again, but she wasn't chugging it. "Can you tell us your name, dear?" asked Upton. The girl finished her drink, swallowed, said, "Princess Adeline." "The Monacan princess," Penelope spat out, perhaps a little too insensitively. Upton was immediately off the bed and stepped up to Penelope, whispered, "Banded harems. They fancy themselves royalty and like to have their own concubines." Umai's bloody womb. She'd realized this woman had been, well, bandits are to women what flies are to manure, especially a young pretty thing like this. But this woman hadn't just been used and discarded, she'd been enslaved. Christ, Penelope didn't know if she was the right woman to be here right now. They had counselors for this sort of thing, didn't they? Government grants, adjustment centers, halfway houses. None of them were on this train, though. Right now, all this girl had was Upton and herself. She steeled herself, gave a firm nod to Upton. Upton returned to the bed. "Are you injured, princess? Can I call you princess?" "I'm hungry." Upton snapped her fingers, motioned to a crate near the door. Penelope rushed over, pulled out a block of arrule. "Get her a blanket as well," Upton said, pointing to a cabinet. Penelope did so, coming over to the bed and unfolding the thin blanket. "Are you cold, princess? Would you like—" "Thank you, Miss Penelope," nodded the girl. Penelope draped the blanket on her shoulders. "And thank you for your kindness with those security men." She quickly jerked her gaze to Upton. "Oh, Miss Marie, please thank them as well for me. They were most gentle, and I'm deeply grateful." "Of course, princess, of course. Eat slowly. You don't want to bring it back up. Do you mind if I check your body for injuries? You know, you don't have to let me. I want you to know that." Princess Adeline was nodding. "It's okay," she said in a mousy voice, reaching for the top button of her cloak. "Lock the door," Upton commanded of Penelope. Mr. Quinn had said, but she cut herself off, went to the door and clicked the lock. Princess Adeline was wearing nothing but a dark pair of panties and some boots beneath her cloak. Penelope averted her eyes, gave the girl some privacy. She could hear Upton talking to the girl. "I'm just checking your circulation, princess, seeing if you have any cuts or scrapes that will need cleaning, okay?" Penelope felt awkward standing there, her back turned, this naked, bandit survivor behind her. "Is there anything I can help you with, Miss Upton?" "Top drawer over there. Fetch a clean pair of Ericsson pants, a shirt, socks. We're going to get this woman cleaned up." "Have you ever had any broken bones, princess?" Penelope brought the clothes over, setting them down gently on the bed. Upton was gently running her fingers across the girl's ribs, back round to the spine. The girl was very thin, looked quite dehydrated. She was thin in the hips, small hands and feet, flat stomach, sunburnt on her neck, her forearms, and the bottoms of her calves, otherwise quite pale. "Have you had a child, princess?" Upton asked, using the back of her hand to touch the girl's chest. "No, Miss Marie. Miss Upton. We were very careful with that. Time of the month and herbs." "That's okay, princess. Let's take a look at your feet, okay? Can you take off your boots for me?" Upton checked over the girl's feet, checking each toe. Hesitantly she asked, Do you remember your real name, princess?" This was the first time the girl had shown the slightest bit of shame. There was a brief moment of silence then. "No, Miss Upton, I'm sorry." "No, that's quite all right, dear." Upton was quick to jump in, almost interrupting the girl. "Princess Adeline is a fine name. My mother used to call me Princess when I was a girl." "All right, looks good. Penelope here has brought you some fresh new clothes. How about you make yourself comfortable in them? I need to let my boss know you look healthy as an ox. Penelope, if you could join me, please." As they soon were out the door, Upton turned to her, made no motion for Ericsson, who was on his horse 10 or so meters away, but turned to her, leaned in close, and said, Did you get a load of the tits? She was somewhat taken aback by this question. It seemed highly unprofessional. She blinked, made herself focus, took it seriously for a second. The girl's breasts had been, well, big. Bigger than you might expect on a girl her size. What had Upton asked? A child. You're thinking, she's a new mother, is nursing. They're fake. I was trying to be polite. Penelope frowned. Fake? It is called a boob job. Her frown deepened. That's money, Upton said. She was struggling to follow the other woman on this. You're thinking rich parents, family money, before she was... She doesn't know her name. Penelope, she's been in this for... Upton was shaking her head. A decade, maybe? A decade? Penelope exclaimed. Upton shifted in motion for her to keep her voice down. She's like 22, 23. And she hasn't been brutalized. Hell, not a single fracture mark on her ribs. A girl breaks a leg out there, it stays broken. She was kept in good health, she was kept pretty. And she got her breasts, out there. That's impossible, she stammered. There isn't a surgeon from here to Broome that would... She'd never survive it. Upton just stared at her with that one eye of hers. Piece it together, Humberton. But try as she might, this didn't make any bloody sense. A young girl is absorbed into banditry, services her owner, somehow winds up with fake tits. She couldn't have had them beforehand. There isn't a legit doctor across the entire continent that would do that under a certain age. Her bandit lord took her into a place like Kalgoorlie or Perth, finds a doctor. She's got Stockholm Syndrome, has convinced herself she wants these things. But where does the bandit get the money? Lumias womb, Penelope herself wouldn't have been able to afford these things with her inheritance if she'd sold the house and foregone the comic business. Upton pinched the bridge of her nose. By now, Ericsson was bringing his horse over, and Upton had to shoo him away. Taking Penelope by the hand, she turned back to the carriage door. Knocking, she said, Princess Adeline, may Penelope and I come back in? Ah, yes, come in, came the reply. Princess Adeline had put on Ericsson's clothes, which were like a circus tent on her, and had the blanket around her shoulders once more. Upton, very gingerly, said, Princess, there's no easy way to ask this. But you know the name of the man. Adeline broke eye contact. You mean Master Ibars, she said. Ibars, whispered Penelope. The name wasn't, it didn't mean anything to her. At least for the past year or so, added the girl. He inherited us. All of us. Yong Kong and Empress Sod and... Princess, Upton said just as gently. Who did you belong to before Master Ibars? When the girl spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Master Pedro. There was the sound of a camel groaning 2 carts up, the clomping of hooves of the big back trains pulling this thing, the squeaky wheel and the creaking of the wood. All this dropped away, and Penelope was left with nothing but the distant, rhythmic echo of her breathing. She was pretty sure Upton had a hand on her shoulder. She no longer saw the girl, just saw the corner of her nose. After some time, she felt Upton pushing on her arm, heard words coming back to her. Thank you, Princess. Make yourself comfortable. There's more arrow in the crate over here. And then she was being shoved back outside. Once they were back outside, the door shut behind them. Upton turned to face her, put her hands out to clasp both shoulders. Breathe, Penelope. Holy fuck. Holy fuck, holy. Keep your voice down, Upton insisted, slapping her palm against Penelope's lips. We don't want to foment a panic. I thought he was fucking dead, she seethed in a whisper. I never would have come on this train if... Clearly he is dead, said Upton. You think for a second he'd allow some other bandit lord to seize his women? The woman was shaking her head. Fucking hell. We've suspected for a while he's been out of the picture. Our sources with military intelligence have reported as much. But Ibars, you know who that is? I've never heard the name before in my life, Penelope blathered. Who in the bloody underworld? The ghost of Pedro Kimbers. I've heard of Wormslayer and Eldrake and... You don't speak Mongolian, do you? The name means moon panther. She is naked, huddled into herself, clutching at the bars of a cage. It is too small for her to either stand in or lie down. She is expected to go to the bathroom right where she sits. She is thirsty, her lips parched, This is a nagar of some sort, though there are no lights and she can barely see. Suddenly, the door is ripped open, and in marches 2 tanned men in desert cloaks. She is taken from her cage, pulled by the elbow. She fights, she screams, she cries, but she is powerless. They pull her, half carrying her, from the gare, out into the harsh desert sun. Sand is blowing, gets in her eyes, her mouth. She is brought to a large canopy, fine Persian rugs covering the sand, beautiful flowers and planters, and a lush throne carved in the shape of a whinnying horse from a single piece of wood. The 2 men relinquish her, and she is approached by a young nude woman, with large breasts and dark hair. Princess Adeline, she realizes. Adeline puts a gentle hand on her, whisks Penelope's hair back behind an ear, touches Penelope's breast, a gentle squeeze. There are other women there too, lounging about on couches. They are nude as well, and playing with each other, as concubines would. Moxie Breastbind is here, wearing just a very thin strip of fabric, squeezing her breasts. She has another woman bent over a couch. Her fingers... The figure on the throne stands. He wears a loincloth, rippling muscles on his chest and arms, and has the head of a black panther, glaring at her with yellow eyes. He opens his maw, a screech of a growl comes out. Princess Adeline is working her index and middle fingers down the breast, pinching the nipple and tugging gently. He says, "Do you like that, love?" Her nipples are quickly growing erect. Adeline leans in, whispers, "It won't be as bad as you think," and kisses her. She blinked. Her dream. Her nightmare. She'd had it, on and off, since she'd signed the lease agreement on the cart and camel. Only now it was more vivid. It was a sudden flash from some distant part of her brain, brought to the fore. The moon panther. The ghost of Pedro Kimbers. Upton said it for her. "We have the concubine of the most powerful outlaw in the hemisphere." Penelope stuttered. "Itigan's fucking tits." Upton was sighing. "I have to tell Erickson." "No," she suddenly insisted. It seemed to come out of nowhere, but she knew it to be right. "Can't tell the men. They could talk to Adeline, tell her to keep mum about her overlords, let there be a sisterhood between the 3 of them. Telling the men, it would only complicate things for Princess Adeline. She'll still have a hard enough time recovering and readjusting to society as it is, without—" "You don't think the bandit emperor of the continent will want his wench back?" Upton spat. "That maybe he'll send reprisals against us? We've got 20 security agents. Pedro Kimbers was allowed to have 100 riders. Some say thousands. I have to disclose this to Erickson, for her benefit as well as everyone else's." She was waving now to Erickson, who pulled the reins of his horse. Erlich's cock, she thought. She found she was clutching her hands into fists at her side. "You need to—" "I know what I need to do," Upton said. "You get back in there, comfort the girl. Let her talk. Don't press her for anything. Don't judge her for anything she says." "What do you think is going to happen with me?" "I don't know the details, Princess, but I imagine you'll go to Perth, or someplace near there. There's a halfway house that survivors of banditry can go to. It will help you adjust to normal life." She had to be careful with what she said to the girl. She didn't want to patronize her, nor did she want to scare her. The truth was, military intelligence would probably have some questions for her. If Penelope sat on the quarrel ties alongside the prince and the prefect, she'd want to get her hands on the girl. This was a woman that had been in the same room as Pedro Kimbers, had made love to him. If what transpired could really be considered making love. Adeline seemed to sense this. "Is Hulagu going to want to talk to me?" The 2 women were sitting on the bed. Adeline with her legs crossed and leaning back against the wall as she ate more arrowroot. Penelope put her hand on the girl's shoulder. "The Hulagu administration and the Olje administration in Alice Springs. They're both committed to the rehabilitation of bandit survivors. Remember, you don't owe them anything. They failed you." She didn't know if this was terrible advice or not. Certainly it was true. Their inability to do anything about the wild country in the deep desert was a travesty when it came to the crimes perpetuated against young women like this. But at the same time, she didn't want to coddle the girl. She may well be in for an intense interrogation at the hands of General Kochu before she ever sees a rehab center. "But I want to talk to Hulagu," Adeline said. "He needs to help my sisters." Sisters? This was the first time she'd mentioned sisters. Dear Christ, did the woman have kin still enslaved out there? Before Penelope could determine what and how to ask, Adeline launched right into it with a ramble. "He still has them. Master Ibars is not a good lord like Master Pedro. He's much better to his own girls. He's never forgiven us for having been touched by Master Pedro. Sarah Squirt, he beat with a rod, and had Conspond lashed until he drew blood because he lost men against Alice Springs. Please, we have to help them. Hulagu has to help them. Okay, calm down, Penelope said. Hulagu is a just man, and I'm certain he'd love to talk to you if you want to talk to him. She'd never see those women again, Penelope realized. Oh, Hulagu would love to talk to her, Penelope was sure, and if the girl could provide any real intelligence, it might result in a few successful counter-banditry raids. But short of continental commitment from Ikkulon, warlords would continue to amass power out there. She could hear now Upton arguing with Erickson outside, their muffled conversation becoming heated. Quickly she said, "How many sisters do you have?" "We were separated after the succession struggles," Adeline said quickly, a piece of cheese in her mouth. "Some of us went with Master Albinus, some with Master Abubakar, a few with Mistress Andrian." The girl was rambling, speaking too quickly, her thoughts just spilling out of her. She was breathing more quickly as well. Penelope wanted to keep her calm, didn't want her to have a panic attack or freak out, but didn't know what to say. There were fights over us, and over the riders. Master Ibars acted quickly to take as many good riders as he could get his hands on. I almost went with Mistress Andrian. She stormed in before I even knew it happened, and told us we're all leaving right then. Couldn't even put on socks. She had me by the elbow, but Master Ibars came in then, and Mistress Andrian drew her sword. Okay, calm down, calm down. Get your thoughts in order. It's a long ride to Geraldton. He kept us in a covered cart for 2 weeks. We were just crammed in there. Valerie the Good Whore didn't even have so much as her underwear when he took us. Empress Sod wouldn't stop crying. Bazooka-Ho thought we were going to be killed. To be summarily executed. Summarily executed. We'd seen Master Ibars do it before. We'd seen Master Pedro do it before. Just take out his sword and clean off with the head. Have you ever seen that? Seen a man cut down in front of you? Princess, Penelope insisted, putting her arms around the girl in an embrace. You are safe now. Do you understand that? Master Ibars is not going to hurt you any more. Hulagu will protect you. And my sisters? The girl asked, teary-eyed, resting her head against Penelope's chest. She could see the girl quivering, feel her shaking in her embrace. The reality was that her running may have doomed these other women. But she couldn't tell her that. Right now, we just need to focus on getting you to safe Innigan's goddamn Norks. It was Quinn, outside. His voice bellowed through the walls of the cart. Princess Adeline noticeably went tense in her embrace. Suddenly the door flew open, and Quinn charged in with fury in his eyes, making a mad dash for the bed. Princess Adeline was white with terror now, clutching at Penelope. Penelope shifted herself instinctually, put herself between the two. Upton was there, grabbed Quinn by the arm. Quinn was a big man, and for a few paces he merely dragged the woman. Erickson appeared as well. There was a verbal altercation, swearing back and forth, snarling like the cart was full of rabid dogs. "Get out, now," came Erickson's voice, cutting through the rest. Penelope was off the bed now, putting herself directly between Quinn and the bandit survivor, even though she was a head and a half shorter than the man and probably 50 kilos less. The skirmish was moving in the other direction now, however, back towards the door, the authority of Erickson bringing the man back. Upton was still snarling. "That cunt will get us all killed," barked Quinn. "Get the fuck out," seethed Upton. "Miss Penelope," whined Princess Adeline, clearly terrified like a savaged kitten. "Mr. Quinn, if you do not leave this cart now," Erickson was saying. "Wait here, Princess," Penelope said, turning to the girl. "Wait here, I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." Suddenly they were outside. Herself, Erickson, Quinn, and Upton. Caverfield and Johnson were there as well, she saw, as was Motoon and Hagar, and a couple of other faces from her section of the train. The camels weren't moving. The train stopped dead on the road. Quinn leapt off the platform, drew his sword, and immediately cut down a cactus 5 meters or so off the road. "Rah!" he snarled. "Mr. Quinn, you need to control yourself," Erickson was commanding. "That display in there was downright barbaric." Quinn whipped his head around, glared at Erickson. "That slut in there sucked the Moon Panther's cock. You don't think he's going to want her back?" "What exactly do you want us to do?" spat Upton. "Send her back to the wastelands." "That's exactly what we should do. Give her some water and send her back to those fucking savages so they'll leave us alone." There was a brief moment of silence when not even a camel grunted. Marie, no longer screaming, broke that silence when she said, "And you think they're the savages?" Quinn drew in a deep breath, calmed himself. Ignoring Upton, he turned to Erickson, said calmly, "I am charged with the security, and will never hire you again," Upton barked, the rage now returning to her tone. "Good sec firms don't sacrifice defenseless little girls to bandit rapers." "The security," Quinn enunciated, his voice rising above hers, "of this camel train, and the patrons who put their trust in the security your train provides. I can't provide security against a coordinated bandit assault. That's what we're paying you for, Erickson quipped. You're paying me for your run-of-the-mill outlaw. You're paying me for parties of a half dozen. Pest control. I'm not the fucking prefectural army. Bloody hell, I've got 20 agents and over 300 people to protect with them. If we get the Moon Panther coming at us, that bitch in there isn't the only one who's going to wind up in a desert harem. It went unsaid, not only that he was implying both Penelope and Upton there, but also that Johnson, Motoon, Erickson, and himself would themselves be dead on the roadside. The power structure of the Kimbers network is broken, Upton argued. Overnight, there was a 60% drop in organized. So you've read the headlines from a few articles in the Perth Times, he spat. I've read more military reports than I can count. Yeah, Kimbers is gone. So fucking what? The Moon Panther is nothing to sneeze at. You think he's some lead rider with a dozen men? Bullshit. He's a desert generalissimo, ruling over a territory larger than the Southwest itself. He's got better odds of becoming Khan than Hulagu. Enough, shrieked Penelope. All eyes turned to her. She spoke directly to Quinn. That girl in there is barely older than 20, and she's been raped every day for 10 years. She's been mutilated and beaten, and her sisters remain in that monster's hands. And you want to send her back? Hell has a special place for people like you. Quinn let out his breath. When he responded, it wasn't with vitriol, but calm, measured words. I'm a pragmatist. By my estimation, she's winding up back in that monster's hands, whether we hand her over or they kill 200 people together. You piece of... Miss Humberton, interrupted Erickson. That's enough. Mr. Quinn. He sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose. Mr. Quinn, get your man started on writing a full report on this. Latitude and longitude, weather conditions, everything. Quinn nodded to Caverfield, who was standing off to the side. Caverfield, somber, nodded back. Picture this is going to sit on Hulagu's desk, Erickson told him. Aye, sir, Caverfield said. Mr. Quinn, Marie, you'll need to add your own reports, but first, get together the crews. We need to determine what we're going to do with this woman. Motoon, who'd now appeared at Penelope's side, asked her in a whisper. They're not, are they? Penelope stepped forward. Mr. Erickson, she said, trying to keep her composure. You're not suggesting her refuge is up for debate. Miss Humberton, I'm going to need a report from you as well. Transcribe your conversation with her. No detail is too small. We can get you a form. Mr. Erickson, Penelope, he cut in. The tone of his voice cut right through her. She kept her gaze affixed to him, but didn't feel that much stability in her knees. This is a situation that affects the welfare of this train and the security of every person here. I won't make a unilateral decision upon it. She had precisely 15 words on her report, and half of that was the date. The afternoon sunlight was causing her to squint. She tapped the pen on the page, but nothing was coming. I'm certain the young woman will be well taken care of, Mum, Johnson told her. The train was moving again. Johnson was on his horse beside the cart, looking over at her empty page. The only thing they should be discussing in their meeting is Quinn's termination. It's his job's to be the devil's advocate, Mum. I can't believe they're even considering anything he suggested. Hand the girl over to bandits. Can you believe that? Utter lunacy, came a new voice. Penelope nearly jumped off her cart. It was Hank Jameson, the bloke who leased the cart ahead of Mr. Hagar's. Do you mind if I come up? She looked back to her report, realized she was getting nothing today on it. She put it aside and said, Sure. Jameson was with a girl, thin and all bundled up in desert garb. Little older than Eunice Dillashaw, maybe 16. Penelope had seen her around in the past week, but she was reclusive. Stayed inside Jameson's cart most of the time. This is my daughter, Charlie. Charlie wanted to meet you. Dad, you're embarrassing me, the girl said, her face going pink. Good day, Miss Jameson, Penelope said, shimmying over on the cart to make room for the two. Hi, Penelope. Miss Humberton, the girl stuttered. I just thought it was really cool of you to stand up for that poor girl. You know, like, the horrible stuff she must have been through. And the sackmen would have just killed her there on the roadside, or sent her back to those bastards. Language, cut in Hank. Penelope smiled. Mr. Jameson, how about you let us girls talk? Jameson nodded. Mr. Ramos, you look after my little girl, eh? Have my bow ready now, Mr. Jameson, Johnson replied. He's overprotective, Charlie whispered when her father had gone. Out here? Can you blame him? Penelope replied. I suppose not with bastards, she said with emphasis, like Kimbers and the Moon Panther out there, doing horrible things to girls like that. Hey, language, Penelope said with a smirk. Those men aren't bastards, they're cunts. Charlie sniggered. I just thought it was really, cool. Yeah, Charlie shifted in her desert robe. It must be bloody hot in that thing. Do you think, I can't imagine what that girl went through. She doesn't even remember her own name. Certain details about Princess Adeline had gotten out. She didn't think it was the best idea, both for security and for the girl's privacy, to be spreading around that they had a bandit survivor straight from Kimber's bed. But undoubtedly, certain details would come to be known from both her initial contact with the train and from the confrontation with Quinn, which had been quite public. Right now, Quinn was arguing the case that they should throw her to the wolves, and even if he lost that case, there would undoubtedly be a number of leases from here to the front of the train that would agree with him. Hell, some base part of Penelope herself wanted to do whatever it took to appease bandit kings to prevent the train's extermination and rape. If the Moon Panther was coming, she shook the thought from her mind. I don't think I should say too much about that, for her privacy, right? Right, said Charlie. But just thinking about, I'd read articles on Kimbers before this trip. They think he's dead. Do you believe that? I've read the same articles. There are people I trust that think he's dead. But that doesn't mean. The Moon Panther, the girl nodded. Got off the head and another one forms. She shivered. What kind of god can allow men like that to exist, even in the wastelands of the Khanate? Indeed. Penelope broke eye contact with the girl, looked off into the desert. Presently she said, Don't think I can answer that, Charlie. I'm not religious. Hey, the girl said, mousy, do you mind if I ask? Everyone kind of knows what you're up to in Mr. Motoon's cart. No judgment, of course. I'm just, the young heritage lad. Don't go screwing blokes on the camel train, she said. You'll get a reputation about you. Smiled. The girl smiled back weakly. Caverfield now, she could see, was riding up on his horse. He brought the beast around, brought it back to speed with her camel. How's your report coming? 15 words, she replied. Yeah, mine's about the same, he said, looked away. They've come to a decision. She suddenly had a very sick feeling in her gut, and he simply said, I think you should come with me. They were giving her back. They were sending Princess Adeline back to those bandit cunts. She raced up to Ericsson's cart behind Johnson in the saddle. Caverfield was right beside them. Motoon, Hagar, and the Jamesons she knew were trying to get their hands on horses as well. Everyone had strong opinions on this. Swerving around a camel cart, the first thing she heard was Marie Upton. She was snarling, irate, red in the face. Consider this my resignation. Marie, please. This was Ericsson, practically pleading with her. The group came into view now. They were once more on the road outside Ericsson's cart. The train had come to a halt up here. There were probably 30 people here, between the security team and the train administrators. Quinn stood off to the side. Marie, don't be so rash. Mr. Ericsson, Penelope cut in. She dismounted Johnson's horse by now, was walking into a circle of people. Oh, for Christ's sake, snorted Ericsson. Mr. Caverfield, I thought I made it clear this was no business of the patrons. Quinn still was saying nothing. That woman in there owes her life to Miss Humberton, Caverfield said. Figured she should have a say in this. What's happening, Marie? Penelope asked, almost arrogant now and demanding an answer. What do you think is happening? Ericsson said, The train has come to a decision. Bullshit, spat Upton. A majority vote, Ericsson clarified. The feeling in her gut intensified, a weight now, burning through the lining of her stomach. She closed her eyes, forced herself to breathe, to think. Upton was saying, Give her a flagon of water and send her to her fucking death. We've had sightings, came a new voice, another SEC agent probably. Camels far to the north. Desert fucking mirages, retorted Upton. I guarantee you we're being watched, said this new security rider. She'll be in good hands when we send her on our way. Good hands, came a baffled snort. Penelope, her eyes still closed, recognized it as Charlie Jameson. If we were being watched, we'd all be dead in the ground now, came another new voice, one she didn't recognize. Presently Penelope said, Johnson, where are we? Johnson in the saddle blinked. About 30 clicks past the loop around Painesville, Mum. The argument between Upton and the faction that had arisen around her continued with the majority vote, but more than one of them fell silent, their attention falling on Penelope. She thought, Mount Magnet. Mount Magnet. It wouldn't be long before they passed through. She couldn't let this girl be sent back to the outlaw scum to be the property of desert brigands. They were civilized, goddammit. Whisking her out of this place was what separated them from the likes of the Moon Panther. She was terrified, yes, paralyzed to the depths of her soul, but she couldn't, simply couldn't allow Quinn's solution to come to pass. They were better than that. Had to be better than that. She was still arguing back and forth, yet when she spoke, mousy as it was, Everything fell silent, and she had the floor. "Payne's find," she said. Quinn now visibly shifted, suddenly less confident than he'd just been seconds before. Penelope looked around the circle, all eyes now on her. "There's a military outpost at Payne's find," she said, pitching her voice louder now. There were some hushed voices now whispering back and forth to her. "They've got 50 men, retorted Quinn in an outburst. 50 men that specialize in desert banditry, Penelope shot back. 50 men that authored half those reports you so readily cite as reason to send that girl on her death march. They've got a yam connection, someone said. Fastest beast in the prefecture, said someone else. She could be at Hulagu's military command center in Perth in a day, Penelope argued. This train would be heaped with honors, and this company would be thanked directly from the mouth of Prince Hulagu. We're a week's ride from Payne's find, said Quinn. We would never make it. We could send a rider, came a suggestion. Get there in half the time. We're being watched, came another voice. That rider would be gunned down before they even crossed the horizon. As soon as this train turned, that would be all the sign they needed to strike. Everyone calm down, urged Erickson. My position remains firm, dictated Quinn. If I could help the girl, I wouldn't heartbeat, without a second thought, but would never make it to Geraldton or to Payne's find. Erickson turned his gaze directly to Penelope. I'm afraid, Miss Humberton, I'm inclined to agree. You only care about the bottom line of the train, came a new voice. Hagar, she realized. We'd change course now. How much money do you lose? Thank you, Mr. Hagar, she silently reflected. We don't have the resources to be riding blindly into the desert, someone shouted. We're set to resupply at Mount Magnet, Erickson said. We would never make it, Quinn enunciated. Well then I'll go, Penelope snorted. Everyone fell silent again. It's my lease, isn't it? That camel and that cart are mine until Geraldton. She was shaking now, clutched her fists at her side to steel herself. That camel and cart are still owned by this company, Miss Humberton, Erickson replied. And you'll get them back in Geraldton. I'm afraid it doesn't work like that. You don't dictate the route, she spat. This she knew. You set courses, you advise. But in times of inclement weather or other hazardous situations, if there is good reason to believe your proposed course is insufficient or otherwise deleterious, each lessee is entitled to dictate their own course. She glared at him. I read the contract closely, Mr. Erickson. This situation is hardly inclement weather, but it is an otherwise hazardous situation, she retorted. You want to take this up in prefectural court? How do you think the magistrate will react when I explain I was trying to deliver the bandit survivor from Kimber's own harem with valuable military intelligence to a military base because you had refused refuge? There was no response to that, not from Erickson anyway. After a moment someone said, Her taking the girl is not the same as us giving her back. The Panther's still going to come for her. We're still exposed, someone else blurted. Panther will cut us to pieces. If you're so certain phantoms are watching you, retorted Hagar, then they'll know we've got her, and we're going south to the fort. Penelope looked to him, mouthed a silent thank you. Aye, agreed Upton. I'm in for this plan. Your phantom bandits will bypass this train to cut them off before Payne's find. Mr. Quinn, if you assign a detachment of your best men. Fuck if I will, Quinn retorted. Look, Humberton, you want to take the girl? Have at it. I really don't have a problem with that, except I think you'll wind up either in a ditch or an outlaw's bed. But hey, that's your business. But I ain't sacrificing the lives of my agents, so folks might sleep easier at night. This is war, and we're in the wastelands. Tough decisions need to be made. Harsh calculations need to be essayed. Well, fuck, snorted Hagar. I know how to shoot. Count me in as well, chimed Motoon, clutching his bow. Fuck, said Upton. I've killed bandits before and I'll do it again. What I won't do is stand by as we sell this woman up Bandit fucking Creek. Miss Humberton, if you're serious about this, I'm with you. She felt like she was going to collapse. The weight in her stomach had become so heavy, it felt like her knees were going to give out, and she might fall limp like a rag doll. Suddenly, she was at the front of this thing, escorting a bandit survivor 150 clicks off the road, through the desert to military officials, with outlaws watching them, and their security captains swearing up and down the entire train could be massacred by these vermin. Was she serious about this? Was she really about to risk life and limb out here for this girl she'd met earlier that day? Presently she said, Miss Upton, we're going to transport her in your cabin. It will provide her with more comfort than my own card. You're insane, said Erickson. You're going to get yourself... Shut it, Erickson, spat Upton. We can discuss my pension when we rendezvous in Geraldton. I'm in, someone shouted. Won't see an innocent woman fed to the Panther. We're in too, said Charlie Jameson. Hank, despite the queasy look on his face, didn't look like he was about to object. There was a half dozen or so others joining the chorus, though it wasn't legions. One in particular kind of surprised her. Caverfield stepped forward to address his boss. Mr. Quinn, I do hope you'll consider me for the next contract, but I'm afraid I have to do what I think is right, and that means... Don't throw your life away, Quinn was saying. You're a good agent. There was some argument back and forth between them, and more disputes broke out as the circle began to break up, and Erickson called for the train to get moving again. There were a few people patting around her shoulder, but for the most part, people were scrambling to get to their carts, to fill up on water, to make their preparations. Johnson appeared at her side, and said, You're a good woman, Mum. You make me honored to work with you. Johnson, she said, please hold me. I don't know if I can move without falling over. We're not being watched. Upton said it as soon as their unit broke away from the main train, comfortingly, her hand on Penelope's shoulder. Penelope looked the woman in the eye, nodded solemnly. Paranoid cravens. Hear the name Moon Panther, and they think there are brigands everywhere, that the buzzards are listening in. You know who's out there in this strip of desert? Bloody no one, that's who. Not a single other soul between here and Payne's Find. The sun was setting now. They had a total of 9 carts in their group, 10 camels and 3 horses. She'd been joined by Motoon and Hagar, the Jamesons, the Heritages, and a handful of others, as well as Upton, Caverfield, and another sec man named Cooper. Nonetheless, I want eyes on the horizon at all times, she replied. Some part of her knew this was just words. If bandits came, it's not like they'd ride over the horizon in a line, flags or banners waving. She'd heard the tales, read the terrifying accounts in the local newspaper. She'd spoken to town councillor Bethel Bandit Killer when she was first considering striking out past town limits. Bandits often weren't seen until it was too late, until they were on you. She had a sudden ache in her breastbone, flinched, put her hand there. Rubber arrow. Precog muscle memory, Upton guessed, put her hand on Penelope's shoulder. I get it too. I think all women do out here. You want a few minutes? I'll go talk to the girl. No, I need to get out of this sunlight. She turned, ducked inside. Upton's cart was smaller than Erickson's, and had a single bed inside, a low roof, and several boxes of supplies. Princess Adeline sat not on the bed, but on the floor in front of it, curled up, holding her knees. She looked halfway terrified on the verge of tears. Hey, Penelope said, ducking under the low ceiling and stepping over to her. I struggled Adeline. Come on, she said, taking the girl by the hand. Up to the bed. There we go. Princess Adeline kind of fell into Penelope, and the two embraced in a hug. Your mates, like... The girl spoke into Penelope's shoulder. I don't know how to thank you for... Well, like, there's no way I could repay you. You're going to go through the halfway house program, Penelope told her. Get on your feet. That's the only repayment we could ever want. She patted the girl on the back. Adeline was halfway to breaking down and sobbing. You were so passionate and strong, the girl said. Penelope realized Adeline had probably heard every word that had been exchanged in that shouting match between Quinn's faction and her own. It must have petrified her. I mean, I don't even know you. We don't need to know each other. Hey, this is what people do. Outside of the desert, this is how people act. How they should act. You're the strong one, remember that. You're the one that got away. And you're the one that's going to tell Hulagu's men what they need to know so that maybe they can help your sisters. Can you just hold me for a little while? Of course, Princess. I remember Boomelin Boobs' real name. It was Justine. Boomelin Boobs? Penelope asked. Was that like Toomelin Tombs? She was sitting on the floor now. Adeline sitting on the bed behind her. The girl was braiding Penelope's hair. Really sweet girl, said Adeline. She came to us just 3 years ago. A fighter said she wouldn't, I guess we all say that in the beginning. Alexandria Handjob took her aside the one day. We don't have to talk about that if you don't want to. The girl was silent for a moment, her fingers on pause with the hair. Presently she said, Are you married, Penelope? No, the last serious boyfriend I had was, well, a while ago. You're very pretty, you know that. Penelope sighed. In the town where I live, I'll find a bloke, eventually. Adeline tugged a little on Penelope's hair. Other men scare me. I had to get away. She was very hesitant. Penelope just let the girl talk. She clearly wanted to get this off her chest. There was this trader. He liked me, and it was all so sudden. Normally we never see men like that. But one night, when I went to use the loo, he was there, and he offered, and "You didn't do anything wrong, Princess. He was the first man beside my masters." Penelope spun at the waist. "I don't think I could have done that," she said. "I know that it's all bundled up inside of you. Hulagu's halfway house will help you with this. But don't think there's anything wrong with what you had to do." Adeline stared gravely for a long moment, gave a little tentative nod. "Have you ever, used your cunt to coerce a man?" Penelope tried with all her might not to look away, to look the girl in the eye. Somberly, she said, "Yes." "Have you ever killed a man?" Now she broke eye contact. "No," she said in a whisper. Adeline turned away. He wasn't a bad guy. She was on her feet now, coming to sit on the bed next to the bandit girl. The braid was ruined, but who cared? She was hugging the girl again. "It's okay," she whispered, patting her on the back. "You did what you had to do." Adeline sniffed. I... Don't second-guess yourself. The air horn bellowed through the walls of the cart. Penelope's fingers became like talons clawing into the girl. Her eyes went wide. She was on her feet before she knew it, scrambling. Her bow was in her hand, her quiver thrown over her shoulder. "Wait here," she was demanding of the girl. She threw herself from the driver's platform of the cart, stumbled a little as she landed. She whipped her head back and forth. "Upton!" she shouted. It was dark out now, the sun gone, the desert lit only by torches. "Caverfield! Johnson! Get yourself to cover, Mum!" Johnson sped by on his horse. She jerked her gaze in that direction, saw Caverfield maybe, shooting a flaming arrow off into the darkness towards the rear of their little unit. That shooting star flew into the pitch until it slammed into something, and she heard a distress cry from a camel. The camel, she could now see in the light, kept charging, yet its rider tumbled off, now engulfed in flames. "Two more!" bellowed a voice. It was Cooper. He was on the opposite side of the road from Penelope's position. It looked like he'd just taken one out himself. 4 o'clock and 7. She took off before she'd even realized, her body just going through the motions of reacting. She charged on foot for the train's 7 o'clock. The air horn blasted again. It was Upton. She had her finger on the thing near the train's rear, that ear-piercing wail flooding this portion of the desert. Penelope leapt into the cart Upton was standing on, bounded onto the roof of it. Her heart was pounding, her breathing insane. She had her bow, was fumbling for an arrow over her shoulder. "What did I say at the briefing when we left?" Upton snorted, her own bow in hand. "Wench is under cover." "Fuck off," she panted. "The wench is under cover. I can shoot. Doesn't look like you can." She was still fumbling with an arrow. She grabbed it, her whole fist around the thing, brought it to her bow. An arrow slammed into the cart just below where they stood. Upton kept her cool, raised her bow and fired into the darkness. Yet Penelope flinched, dropped her arrow, had the instinct to duck and run. Breathe. Breathe. She grabbed another arrow. A scream emerged in the distance. From the corner of her eyes she saw flames. Cooper, he must have gotten the one at 4 o'clock. She could see a rider in the distance. He was retreating now, saw his mates come to blows. There was an arrow out there, a flame. She could see the bloke on a camel, charging for the horizon. She lined up her shot, peered down the shaft. Upton was reaching for her next arrow. She could do this. She knew she had the aim. Her breathing had steadied now, her nerves had steeled. This was banditry scum, come to take that poor girl back into bondage and rape the rest of them. If this shit has its way, by the time tomorrow, Penelope herself could have the Moon Panther's cock in her. She hesitated. Just for a brief second, but long enough. She felt the weakness in her knees, felt her breathing waver. The bandit fell, tumbled from his camel. Caverfield whisked past the cart on his mount, charging for him. "Nice shot," Upton belched. "Shut it," she said in a near whisper. She was still holding her arrow. "Come on," Upton said, and jumped off the back of the cart, took off running. Penelope, after a moment of hesitation, blinked, nodded, and followed. Why hadn't she shot? She was better than this, needed to be better than this. She and Upton sprinted, converged on the location of the fallen bandit. Caverfield was already there, as was Johnson, 2 torches alighting the sands. The bandit was still alive. He was on his knees, his breathing labored. He had an arrow in his back. Caverfield's arrow. He was just a young kid, maybe 17, 18, scrawny, hungry, hair back in a ponytail, scruffy fuzz on his chin and upper lip. Part of her was almost glad she didn't shoot, but part of her still despised her own weakness. Caverfield was dismounting his horse. Johnson had an arrow trained on the bandit. Caverfield, a torch in hand, approached the lad. "How many others?" "Fuck you," wheezed the bandit. "Where's your base of operations?" The bandit let out what sounded like a half hiccup. He wasn't meeting Caverfield's gaze. Lenny, he said. You killed Lenny. Do you have reinforcements waiting? Caverfield enunciated. A vacant stare. Lenny. Caverfield stepped in closer. Where is the Moon Panther? The bandit labored in his breathing, slowly looked up to meet Caverfield's eyes. Fuck you, you fascist piece of... An arrow embedded itself in his chest. There was half a gasp, and then the man fell over onto his back. It was Cooper's shot. He was now galloping up on his horse. 4 total, he declared. No signs of diversion, of grander coordination. Are there any injuries? Johnson was asking. Can we get a head count? Upton spoke to Caverfield, to Cooper. This wasn't the Panther. It was more of a statement than a question. It was Cooper that spoke first. Strongly doubt it. Too easy. These were your run-of-the-mill thievers. So there's no one out there watching? Johnson asked. Let's keep moving either way, Upton interjected. Somebody round up those camels. The bodies. We don't have time to bury them. There were nods from the men. Humberton, I need to speak to you. Great. That's just what she needed. To get bitched out for hesitating half a second with her arrow, told she's a wench that should be cowering beneath a tarp somewhere every time a few miscreants are spotted. She stepped away from the men with Upton. Listen, I've been training this bow for months. With people that range farther than you or I ever will. Solo jobs. You under... Upton waved her hand. How's the princess? Penelope sighed. She's going to need a lot of counseling. A nod. I figured. Is she going to be cooperative with the military? I think she's scared. But she wanted her harem mates rescued, and she's bought into the idea of Hoolagoo being this great and merciful savior. Another nod. All right. She's got a real rapport with you. Go check on her. Reassure her she's safe. Penelope wanted to ask if the girl really was. What happened to not a single other soul between here and Payne's Find? She said nothing, though, merely nodded, and hoped not to see any more of these miscreants until they're under military guard. She slept with Princess Adeline that night, and for the next 2 nights. The girl snuggled up, spooning her. It was actually quite uncomfortable, especially when she had to slither out from under the girl to go pee in the middle of the night. But the girl was a world away from everything she'd ever known, and longed for a little compassion. So, despite the fact that Penelope would really rather share a bed with someone else only a cart away, she stayed to offer a human touch to the girl in the darkness of that desert night. There were no more bandits. No more run-of-the-mill miscreants, no more sightings of scouts and spies watching them. They were alone out here. It had been 3 days, and the only issue they'd seen hadn't done anything more than nail an arrow into a cart at Penelope's feet. She arose that 3rd morning, went outside to fetch herself and Adeline some breakfast, and was confronted with an argument between Upton, Hagar, and their 2 security officers. We have extra camels now, Cooper was saying. You give me 2 of them, I could be there by 3 this afternoon. We'd be back not long after dark. I'm halfway inclined to agree, said Hagar. With respect, Mr. Hagar, Upton replied calmly. Although I have no doubt you're quite good with a bow, Mr. Cooper has been trained to deal with these situations. And he's demonstrated he's quite good at what he does. She shifted her gaze down to the sect man. You 2 are the only real security we have. Oh, sure, lots of people know how to shoot. But you know what I mean when I say real security. Cutting that number in half to save a day. Real security is what you need to go to, Cooper cut in. Can't in good conscience send someone like Hector Heritage off into the desert by his lonesome. Penelope had become something of a leader, a matriarch of this excursion, so she felt the need to interject herself into this. Morning, mates. What's the story? Upton spoke first. It's been proposed that we send Mr. Cooper as an advanced rider to Payne's Find. He's saying he could be back by nightfall with heavy military guard for our guest. And you're afraid that cutting our sect team in half is unwise, she deduced. If we were being watched, Cooper argued, if there were phantom bandits on the horizon reporting back our moves right to the Panther, we'd be dead already. They wouldn't wait 3 days before showing themselves. But what if we ran into more little troublemakers like the first night? Penelope asked. Sure, if we got 1,000 bandits descending on us to rescue their master's wench, we're dead. But 4 or 5 more blokes looking to take our camels and thieve some Arul, that's still a possibility, isn't it? I suppose you have a point, he conceded. My fear is that, if the Panther's men are coming, it's better to cut a day off the window of opportunity. But as you say, are they really coming? Why haven't they attacked already? Quinn was paranoid that every piece of brush has a set of eyes. But where are they? And, piped Caberfield, if I may add, suppose there's some mass force of 1,000 outlaws spying on us right now. Could they not overrun and exterminate 50 military men, just as readily as they could us? Whole trains disappear because of them, like it's the Bermuda Bloody Triangle. Bandits attacking a fortified military base, engaged in a long siege. That's one thing, but on open road. I think we're far better off with you here, said Upton. We'll be in Payne's Fine in 36 hours. Everyone agreed. Penelope walked with Upton to the cart behind Upton's own, where the foodstuffs were being stored. I tell you, I'm getting really sick of our and boards, she told the woman. You think the base at Payne's Fine is going to have filet mignon? Ours, at least, we buy from a company that flavors it. Crikey, she muttered. And we're going to be there for a while, aren't we? Upton gave a half nod. I'd count on it. They're not just going to want the prince's words on this. They're going to want full debriefs. Hell, that young Jameson girl is going to be in a room with them for 12 hours as they press her on her story. Yeah, I was thinking about that. Anyway, you could spend the day with Adeline, explain to her the men in Payne's Fine might be, well, not as comforting as you and I, but that they have the end goal of helping her more than you and I ever could. I'm really hoping to stretch my legs today. What, you're getting tired of braiding her hair? Talking about chocolate mousse and deep tissue massages and all the benefits of civilization? You want me to go in there with my monotone and dictate to her about military debriefs and how much therapy she's going to need at the banditry halfway house? If that girl were any more intimate with you, I'd find her wrist deep inside you when I came to deliver lunch. She's not like that with me. You're the one who saved her, and she's well aware of it. Penelope bit her lip. Upton was right. The administrator didn't have the soft touch needed with this delicate girl. She resigned herself to another day and a half in that cramped cabin. Idigan's tits used to talk about getting away, stealing some camels and just making a run for it. She talked about this thing in the beginning. She was told not to, told what would happen, but she never let the idea go. Now she's still there, and it was me. Penelope was now braiding Adeline's hair. She said, Idigan's tits. She was a lovely brunette, hourglass figure, green eyes. She came from... Where did she come from? Coral Bay, I think. That's where she always wanted to run to, anyways. It's a lovely name. It's something dirty, isn't it? Well, Adeline shifted, causing Penelope to lose hold of a lock of her hair. She was named after boobs, wasn't she? Penelope felt herself go a little warm. It refers to the chest of the fertility goddess, she said hesitantly. It's a swear. Princess Adeline was quiet for a moment, then suddenly broke out in laughter. Chortling, she managed to get out. She was named after boobs. How many times did I tell her? By the sky, would her face be red if she were here? Tell me, how about Salenga Skankhole? Is that a boob thing? Salenga Skankhole, she asked, half incredulous, her fingers trying to work the hair. No, that's a butt thing. Adeline guffawed. She was named after the butthole. It was good to see her laugh, to just see her in good spirits despite all she's been through. It was instances like this, moments when the girl's demeanor appeared less fragile, that gave her hope. Penelope had tried to broach the subject that the officers of Payne's Fine might act less like therapists and more like interrogators, but had yet to find the words to express this properly. Adeline asked, Who was Princess Adeline? The real one? Was there a real one? She was a European princess. Do you know where Europe is? Someplace far, far away. Well, her father wouldn't give her up. This was back in Harrigan's time, and he wanted the princess. Wanted her to fuck. Yes, she said flatly. She realized she was discussing a potential sex slave with a rescued sex slave. But her father wouldn't let her go. I think I know this, said Adeline. And Europe was destroyed, wasn't it? Well, not quite destroyed, but she thought of what Hager had been asking Johnson about the nuclear perimeters. Something like that. That was very brave of him, to protect his daughter like that. Yes, but how many hundreds of millions would be alive if she'd just given herself to Harrigan's bed? A shiver went through Penelope. This was the same reasoning Quinn had used. She grabbed an elastic and slipped it into the braid, past the Princess Amir. Very nice, said the girl. Just like Boobs McSuck used to do. And then she giggled. Penelope smiled despite herself. I need to pee. She grabbed her bow. Princess Adeline wrapped herself up in a hooded cloak. This was really the only time she left the cart, and like herself covered up and invisible. There were always eyes on her. Charlie Jameson wondering what horror she'd been through, or Louis Heritage wondering what her fake boobs looked like. And she liked to hide under that cloak. She stepped out the front of the cart, smelled that dry desert air. Upton, Penelope called. The woman, not far off, maneuvered her camel over. Penelope took the reins while Upton stepped onto the cart's driver's platform. Penelope and Adeline mounted the camel and rode it forward. Johnson, on his horse, followed without prompting. They found a spot around behind some brush. Johnson kept his distance. Both women dismounted, and Penelope turned her back as the girl hiked up her cloak and squatted. As she did her business, Adeline asked, "So, Itigan controls things like pregnancy and birth and mother's milk and stuff, right?" "That is what they say, Princess. Do you think, you think she'll be mad at me for the herbs I've taken when—" Penelope quietly sighed. How do you talk about religion with a girl like this, who's been through what she's been through? She said, "I don't believe in Itigan, Princess, but I'm certain she'd recognize when you did what you had to do. Master Pedro, he had certain women he used for his children. They were different from us. I don't think he did anything wrong, Princess." Adeline appeared next to Penelope. "Will you come visit me, in the halfway house, once I'm done telling Hulagu's officers about Master Pedro and Master Ibars?" The halfway house would be where? Perth? Probably, or a suburb near there? That was 6 weeks' ride from Leinster? Maybe you could do it in less if you travelled with your own security team, making hard time and avoiding a slow progression of the camel train, but she wasn't so sure she'd want to venture onto the open road again after a trek like this. Hell, she'd seen an outlaw slain right in front of her just a few days ago. How could she possibly justify that financially? There'd have to be a convention or something in Perth. It's the only way she could spend so much time on the road. But Adeline was looking at her with puppy dog eyes. Penelope said, "Of course." That night, as Adeline's breath gently fluttered in her hair, Penelope quickly faked having dozed off. Once she was sure that Adeline was asleep, she gave it another few minutes, then gingerly reached up and slipped the princess' arm off her shoulder, eased her way out and off the bed. She tiptoed over to the luggage bag of toiletries, looked over her shoulder to ensure the princess was still sleeping. She was peaceful as could be. Penelope grabbed the mirror from the bag, checked her hair. Careful to mind the door, she sneaked out, latching the thing behind her gently. The desert air was cool in the night, gave her a little shiver. The camels were resting, tents pitched here and there, the odd fire pit still glowing. Cooper she could identify on his horse down the line. Hagar was on one of the reclaimed camels up front. Caverfield and Johnson she knew would be sleeping by now, the nighttime security being handled in shifts. She could easily sneak past these two. She'd done it enough times just going to the bathroom. She leapt off the cart, kept herself low. She scurried, hid behind a dozing camel, slinked up behind the cart's wheel and peered out. She had to wait for a few minutes. She'd lost sight of Cooper, couldn't risk being out in the open unless she knew where he was. There, she saw him. He was headed this way, but he clearly hadn't seen her. She sidestepped, went back, slipped behind a sleeping camel, and curled up into herself. These things stank, but she got in close to the beast, careful not to wake it. Cooper rode by on the other side, taking his sweet time, but she was pretty sure he still didn't know she was there. As soon as he passed, she'd sprinted. She still kept herself low, like there were arrows soaring past her. But she was quick, had to be, before Hagar rode down the other side. She grabbed hold of the step on the side of the cart, climbed it like a tree kangaroo. She didn't knock, just went right in. Motoon still had a candle lit, was reading. He looked up as soon as she opened the door, at first horrified by her entry. It was still awkward between them, but he looked pleased. Said, "Pen, shh," she whispered. "I don't want Cooper or Hagar to know I'm here." He had a little grin beginning. We have something long overdue to finish." And then she was kissing him, hungry lips on his, her teeth nibbling his lip. She had her fingers in his hair, was grinding herself against his thigh. Bloody underworld, she'd known she'd wanted this, but hadn't realized how much she wanted it. She was damn near rabid. It had been almost 2 weeks since she got not a moment of privacy on this train. She fumbled at her shirt, got the buttons down. She wasn't wearing a bra. "Someone's hungry." "Very," she replied. Her shirt hung open now, and she was fumbling with his belt. He was hard. Fuck did she want it. She was so wet. She slipped his underwear down around it, grabbed hold of him. She moved. He shifted. "We don't have to—" "I want this," she said, and got down on her knees. She slipped her own hand into her dax and started playing with herself. He reached down, past her, gave her breast a gentle caress. A shiver went through her like a delicious static shock. "Holy fuck," he muttered. "Jesus, can you ever—" "Oh." "Make sure you save it, okay?" she said, grabbing hold again with her hand as she spoke. "There's other places I want this. We could, now if you want." "Not yet," she grinned. "You know how long it's been since I've been in this position? I love this." and she put it back in her mouth. She was jilling hard now. She'd been having wet dreams about this for the past 2 days. She was bucking into herself. She was so close. Fuck, she'd wanted this for a while. She bobbed up and down. He grabbed harder at her breast now. Yes. Crikey, right in her own hand. She was going to... The sudden knocking at the door, quiet as it might have been, sounded off like a cannon. She slowly brought her head up, sighed, "Bloody fucking hell." Motoon said, "It's like it's written in the stars. I was so bloody close, too." "Miss Humberton," came a voice through the door. It was Upton. "You're needed out here." Penelope groaned, said to her lover, "This is how she lost her eye. How much you want to bet?" "Go," he said, a little smile. "Probably important. We will finish this later." She got up, gave Motoon a little peck, then walked to the trailer door. She didn't even bother buttoning up her shirt. She reefed the door open with the hem barely covering her naughty bits. "There's a special place in hell for people like you," she said to Upton. "You know that." With zero patience, Upton said, "Sorry to interrupt your private time," she said with an exaggerated draw on the words. "But we have a traumatized bandit survivor freaking out because you've disappeared." Penelope sighed, grumbled, "Bloody fucking hell." She started doing up her buttons, hopped off the cart. "Don't tell her what you are doing," Upton called after her. "It's unladylike." "So's this," she called back, giving Upton the finger. Princess Adeline was pacing back and forth frantically when Penelope entered. "Thank the sky," the girl exclaimed. "Marie told me you're okay, but you were gone for so long, and I thought..." Penelope was seething, but seeing the panic on Adeline's face, she tried to calm herself, stepped toward to hug the girl. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm okay." "Like, I felt you got out of bed, and I saw you leave, and I was going to the bathroom," she said, patted her on the back. She stepped back from the girl, held Adeline by the shoulders, and said, "You know, when we get to Payne's Find, the officers are going to want to talk to you alone." Adeline gave a shaking nod. "I know. They're not going to let me be there, and they might not be as gentle as me and Marie. I'm prepared. They're going to be men, and they're going to ask inappropriate questions. They're going to ask you about Master Pedro. They're going to ask you about the things he made you do. They're going to ask you to talk about the herbs you took, where you got them, the markets and the trade up there. They're going to want answers, the best answers you can give. And they're going to push you hard for those answers. I know. I need you to answer them 100%. Tell them the awful truth. Tell them about Justine and Inigan's tits and Selenge's butt sex. Tell them about the trader that helped you, about what you had to do to him. Tell them about what Master Pedro's doctors did to your chest." It was now that the princess looked away, ashamed. Penelope forced herself to continue. "I know it's not easy to think about, but they're going to need to know, and I'm going to need you to tell them. Please, if you're thankful for the risk we're taking, please tell them." "I was so sick afterwards," she said, her voice a whisper. "But Master Pedro really liked them, and he paid a lot of money." Penelope drew in a breath. "Master Pedro is a bad man, and we're going to help you get better. But you're going to need to be honest with Hulagu's officers." I will. "And you promise me?" Adeline gave a single nod of the head. "I promise. And I will come see you in the halfway house. I promise." The two women hugged again. Holding Adeline, Penelope added, "I'm really impressed by you, you know that? You have a real courage. A real courage." The two women held each other. Adeline with her hand on Penelope's shoulder. She could tell the girl needed this human touch, this embrace. She just held the girl for a long moment. In Penelope's embrace, the princess asked, "You weren't peeing, were you?" Penelope stepped back, cast a look at the girl. Adeline said, "I'm being honest with you." Then she touched herself, cupped herself. His name was Dr. Harkin. Went a little red. "I was really small before." Penelope said, "I was sucking dick." A little devilish grin from Princess Adeline. "Mr. Hagar?" "What?" Penelope exclaimed. "No, Motoon." "Really? I didn't know that you liked Asian blokes." "Well, I've yet to be with one," she enunciated. "I won't know if I like it until I'm able to finish." "Oh, I'm sorry. Go back to him. I'll be okay here tonight." "No," Penelope said, patting the girl on the back. "I'll stay with you tonight." She sighed. "Come on, let's get some sleep. By this time tomorrow, we'll be safe at Payne's Find." I'm never eating arrowroot again, she told Johnson at sunrise. The camels were moving now. She stood on the platform of Upton's cart, stretching her back and forcing more of that camel's cheese curd into her mouth. Johnson rode his horse up to the side of the cart. He looked just as tired as she felt just then. How in the hell did a couple sleep, spooned into each other all night? You get used to it, Mum, he said, stifling a yawn. After you return from your third convention, you won't be able to go a week without a taste of it at meals. Crikey, don't tell me that. What did I miss in the night? No visitors, I take it. Not a soul, he replied. Not so much as a red kangaroo. Excellent. You're going to tell me where that bastard is, or... Calm down. Right now our only task is getting to Payne's find. It was Hank Jameson and Caverfield, arguing some distance back. It was quite unhinged by the sound of it. She eyed Johnson. The young Miss Jameson and the night mum. She apparently got caught in Lewis Heritage's bed. Mr. Hagar tried to keep it under wraps, but to little avail it seems. Penelope shook her head. I told that girl not to go screwing blokes on the camel train, she muttered. Johnson just looked at her. I did. I told her just a few days ago. With respect, Mum, he replied with a little grin. You didn't exactly set the best example for her. Oh, shut it, Ramos, she spat, trying not to grin herself. She shook her head. Stone the crows, I'll never be able to stop the girls at Lake Darlet from hearing about this. I don't believe this will be kept quiet, no, he said, with some embarrassment in his tone. And Ash, God, she's going to hear about me. She cut herself off, didn't even want to say. Took another bite of her morning curds. He said, How's our guest of honor doing? Scared, I think. I was a little tough with her last night. Told her what to expect at the fort. She chewed for a moment. How rough do you think they'll be with her? She shared a bed with both Pedro Kimbers and the Moon Panther, he replied. They're going to be like feral dogs with raw meat. I'd against tits, she muttered. But they're also bandit intelligence specialists, he said, as you yourself pointed out to Mr. Quinn. I think they're going to be able to recognize post-traumatic stress disorder when they see it. Hank Jameson's voice carried over them once more. I didn't agree to come on this journey to nowhere so my daughter could get molested. Bloody hell, she grumbled. She shook her head at Johnson, tossed him the loss of her arrow. Finish this for me. She hopped off the cart, stood there waiting as the Jameson cart worked its way up to her. Caverfield was on a camel, riding alongside. Hank was nearly frothing at the mouth, shouting at the sackman. Mr. Jameson, she called, grabbing hold of the step and pulling herself up. We're not going to nowhere. We have a destination, and it's to get help for someone who's actually been sexually mistreated. There was indignation in her tone, and it seemed to be enough to cut through Hank's barking. Right now, she's terrified, because in a few hours, the military is going to be writing reports on how many times she was sodomized by the Moon Panther. You're out here yelling about your daughter getting her rocks off isn't helping. Hank was flummoxed. Clearly he recognized that screaming about molestation was not the best idea with a bandit survivor just up the road. But at the same time, he hadn't said his piece on Lewis Heritage. That prick, Charlie. He was stuttering, spittle flying from his mouth as he tried to speak. Thank you, Penelope, said Caverfield, clearly exasperated with this situation. He, too, looked rather tired. We're doing better than we thought. Maybe 20K. If we push hard, we could be there before lunch. Good. Let's keep the animals moving. This isn't the end of it, Hank jumped in. At least he was whispering now. Charlie is 16. Do you understand? She's still a child. And Lewis is how old? She retorted. 18? 19? I don't care if they're born at the same minute on the same day. I'm not having my 16-year-old daughter heartbroken or preg. In the coming weeks, she would tell this story, describe these events to dozens of people. Friends, family, colleagues, officials, Josephine and Kelly out at Darlot, therapists. She would write a 10,000-word report that probably made it all the way to Hulagu's desk, as well as an additional 30 or 40,000 words in diaries and journals to help her put it all in perspective. The order of events changed. She doesn't remember, for example, even to this day, if Hank was cut off in the middle of the word pregnant, or if her mind had merely filled in the natural conclusion of that sentence, but he was instead cut off at heartbroken. In some renditions of this story, Caverfield was on a Bactrian camel, in others, it was a dromedary. She has no recollection as to whether the sun had fully crested the horizon or not. One thing she does remember, however, with crystal clarity, is that in that absolute last moment of calm, the hair on her arm stood on end. It was all so fast, faster than she could process. The cart lurched as a terrible ripping sound spread itself like butter on bread over all other sound. She was thrown against the door of the cart. Hank, too, slammed into the wall beside her, barely remaining on his feet, and she saw blackness billowing from behind him. Smoke. Munitions. Caverfield fell, practically leapt from the camel. There may have been an arrow in him. There was a camel snorting and someone shouting, and suddenly she was on the deck, Hank having apparently tackled her to get her down. Out of the corner of the eye she saw a barrage of arrows, some of them on fire. The cart was engulfed now, and Hank was on his feet, turning for the door to get Charlie. There was an arrow in his back. He was dead before he hit the deck. Suddenly, some brief few seconds into this, she realized the danger. She also realized she was repeating, "Fuck, fuck, fuck!" The door flew open. Charlie appeared. Immediately there was an arrow in her gut, sticking right into her side. She grunted, her eyes bugging out, her knees buckling, her hands going for it. Penelope moved. Had to fucking move. She was off her back and had an arm around Charlie. Then the two were rolling in the sand. Two men in desert cloaks sprung from beneath the sand, propelled upwards by some unnatural force it seemed. A splash of sand and two dagger-wielding desert marauders. An arrow embedded itself into one of them. Cooper charged by on a horse, but the other one was unscathed. She wasn't even thinking, she just did it. The arrow came out of Charlie. There was a whine from the girl and wetness on Penelope's hand, and then she was turning, the bandit charging, and she'd driven the arrow into him, up to the chin, deep. She saw the life leave his eyes. She remembers that clearly. Pen. It was Charlie. She was pale, had blood on her shirt. It could be said that Penelope herself was no longer in the driver's seat. She watched this from some distant place. She was there at Charlie's side on her knees. She grabbed Charlie by the shoulders and ripped off the girl's overshirt, wrapped it around her waist, tied it. Pressure, keep pressure on it, goddammit. Adeline, she had to get to Adeline. That's all she could think about. Have you got it? Have you got it? She was demanding. Don't. But Penelope was already scurrying away. Don't leave me, maybe? This would haunt her in days to come. More bandits burst from the sand. She threw herself behind a cart's wheel. The man Cooper had killed was there. She picked up his dagger. Just behind the spokes of the wheel, Upton was engaging these new outlaws, swinging a scimitar, 2-on-1. Penelope was nearly hyperventilating. She clutched that dagger white-knuckled. 3 arrows embedded themselves into the cart in rapid succession, and she was forced to move. Upton slew the one bandit, cutting him down in a skillful bit of swordsmanship, but it left her right flank exposed. The other bandit came at her, raised his blade to cleave. Penelope was there, drove the dagger into the man's back. He gurgled something as he began to fall. Upton was just turning back. The woman was breathing heavily, sweat pooling on her face and neck, said, "Thang." The ground shook beneath them, and a fireball arose from the cart 2 lengths up. Shards of wood belched outwards from the orange and black, and a deafening growl nearly knocked both women off their feet. This one was much bigger than the initial attack. When the sound began to fade from her ears, she could hear the camels in agony, a horse shrieking, men, women, and screaming. "Get to the girl," Upton was demanding. Penelope blinked, forced herself to breathe. Suddenly, Upton was tackling her, and she was on the ground. Upton was swinging her sword, engaged with another one. Her blade and his smacked together. Upton didn't have the strength to overpower him. She faked right, went low, raked her blade across his guts. The man's inside spewed out from him right at Penelope's feet. Upton brought up her blade to finish it, and the woman's head came clean off. There was another outlaw, sand in his cloak and a grisly beard, Upton's blood on his blade, scowling at Penelope. She scurried back, slinking on her elbows. He came for her. An arrow in his chest. "Move, Pen!" It was Motoon. He'd saved her. He grabbed her by the elbow and hauled her to her feet, pulled her behind a cart that was overturned. It was now that she saw there were at least 5 or 6 camels racing about that weren't Johnson or Hagar or Cooper or Hector Heritage. They were surrounded. My bow! My bow! She didn't know how long she'd been saying it. It was with Adeline in Upton's cart. That wasn't the cart that... No, she saw it. The camels were freaking out, fighting the reins. It was 10 meters from here. The wheel practically disintegrated, and the cart collapsed on that one side. "Flares," Motoon was saying. Right, they had emergency flares. The military was... How long would it take them to get here? She stuttered, "Princess Adeline!" "We're not going to let them take her," he insisted. "Get to the flare!" And then he kissed her, and took off running with his bow. The feeling of that kiss lingered on her lips for an extra second, then she blinked. More arrows sailed overhead. She still held that dagger, took off for the heritage cart. That's where the flares were. She ran. Camels were scattering now. It was chaos. Carts were overturned and there was blood spattered everywhere. There was another explosion of the heritage cart. This one not as massive, didn't destroy the cart, but it did smash the right wheels and cause the cart to lurch, and then roll over onto its roof. She stopped in her tracks, her breath flying out of her. She had to move. Had to move. She ran to the cart, reefed on the door. It fell to her feet. Lewis was inside, toppled over a box, had blood in his hairline. He looked dazed. "Lewis! Lewis!" she called, stumbling over boxes and whatnot to get to him. Lewis blinked. What? Penelope, is that you?" "Stay with me, Lou," she said, throwing her shoulder into the box on his chest. She got down on her knees beside him, checked his head wound. Small gouge on his scalp. The bleeding wasn't too bad. "Pen, you're going to protect that girl." Yes, she said. "Where are the flares?" "The flares? The flares," she demanded. He pointed. There was a small wooden crate to his right, lying on its side. She kicked it, knocking the lid off. There was an orange plastic gun inside, along with some emergency medical supplies. She jammed the gun into her belt, grabbed the liquid bandage as well, popped the cap, squirted a bunch of it onto Lewis. She massaged it into his scalp. He recoiled, belching out something that was half a whine and half a snort. "Hey, calm down. This'll help you. Hey, I heard you got with Charlie last night. Good on you, mate. I know she thought you were a cute one for a while." This distracted him enough that she could spread the stuff evenly through his hair. She took her hand and wiped it on her trousers, but the goop was already starting to coagulate into glue. "Can you walk?" "I'll try," he said. "Okay, come on." She helped him to his feet, grabbed the dagger and headed for the door, ducked to get out of it. "Watch your head," she said. She looked up, had to get to the roof. What was now the roof. Wanted as much distance on the flare as she could get. Turned to Lewis. He toppled backwards as an arrow landed in his chest. "Ah!" she spat, turning in the same instance and power diving into the assailant, the dagger held in her hand only by the liquid bandage. She tackled the outlaw only a few meters away. The two went tumbling to the ground. She wasn't sure if the dagger hit anything. The bandit was thin, light, wore a cloak, a hood, had a facial covering. In some distant part of her mind, she realized the bandit was feminine. There weren't any female bandits, were there? This was not a question that arose to her conscious mind. "Ah! Ah!" she shrieked, finding herself atop the brigand, straddling her, stabbing. "Ah! Ah!" She was stabbing long after the woman was dead, and this bandit was a woman. There was clearly a feminine form beneath that cloak. And with bloody hands, Penelope peeled back the facial covering to show a delicate feminine face. She was probably a little older than Charlie. Penelope was sobbing, she realized. Not just crying, but sobbing. And she was drenched in blood. She stood, shaky legs, felt her belt. Where was the fucking... There in the sand, not far from her. Picked up the gun, climbed the side of the cart. She was still shaking, still sobbing, when she pulled the trigger. A ball of light erupted from the thing. It shot more or less straight upward, a howl of a sound following it. If there was any part of her that could pray, she prayed it was seen by the officers at Payne's Fine. She prayed they were already on their way. "Mum!" She almost smiled. Almost. "Get down!" Johnson cried. She practically let herself fall. He swerved his horse around, crouched in the saddle so he was somewhat shielded by the upturned cart. I thought, he was rambling. "I'm so glad you're..." It was then he saw the monsoon of blood on her. She blinked, got to her feet. "Get me to Adeline." She took his hand, got up onto the horse behind him. He maneuvered the animal, pushed it forward. Upton's cart, where the princess had been, was now 40 or 50 meters up. There were overturned carts and dead camels strewn about, and plenty of bodies. Fires raged on some of the carts, and there were at least 8 or 9 mounted outlaws she could see. "I need range of motion, Mum," Johnson called. She let go of his waist, leaned back, steadied herself on the back of the saddle. Johnson pulled 2 arrows from his quiver, pinched one at the ready in his left, while he knocked and drew the other. Took aim, fired, flicked the other one into place, an instant later, drew, fired. The second bandit was dead before the first one hit the ground. They neared Upton's cart. It had been abandoned by the camels now, having broken free from the reins. She could see Motu not far off, taking cover in some brush. He popped out, loosed an arrow, vanished back beneath undergrowth. Hector Heritage rode by in the opposite direction, launching from his own bow. His brother was dead, she'd realized, and he didn't even know it. "Quickly, Mum," said Johnson. "Get your bow and get her to cover." He reared the horse to a halt near the cart, and she practically dove off. She rammed herself into the door. It nearly tore from its hinges. The cabin was disheveled, boxes overturned and supplies on the floor. She didn't see Princess Adeline. "Princess!" she called urgently. She had a sudden fear that the girl was already gone. The bandits had already come in here and hauled her off, and she was now gagged and tied on the back of a camel a kilometer from here. Penelope almost felt her heart stop. "Princess! Princess!" she shrieked. The sheets on the bed moved, and Penelope could see 2 eyes poking out from under the bed. "Thank you, my fucking twat," she muttered. There was another explosion outside, which shook the walls of this cart and caused a stack of boxes to topple over. "Come on, we've got to get you out of here." "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," Adeline was blathering as she came out from under the bed. "They've come for me. I... Get your cloak," she commanded. "Hood up, cover your face. Here, take this." She handed over the bloody dagger, scooped up her bow and quiver, which she spotted not far from where she stood. "Come on!" As soon as she was out the door, she practically elbowed Adeline back inside as she fumbled for an arrow. An outlaw whipped past her. An arrow slammed into the cart behind her. She got hold of her own arrow, drew, missed. Her arrow hit nothing but air. "Bloody fuck," she spat. "Come on." She took Adeline by the hand, practically dragged her out. They jumped off the cart, headed for the brush where Motoon was crouched. As soon as she saw him, she dove at him, wrapped her arms around him, kissed him hard. Pulling back, she saw now he had blood on him, down his shirt and a little on his chin. She looked at herself. She was still drenched. "Sorry," she said. Before he could reply, Upton's cart went up in a fireball, the force of the explosion strong enough to knock all 3 of them to the ground. "Ah, fuck," she heard Motoon say, when her ears stopped ringing. A chunk of wood had embedded itself into his thigh. "Eddin's tit," she muttered, scurrying to him. Cooper rode up on his horse. "Protect the girl," he commanded. "There's an old mine shaft 150 meters that way." "I'll be fine," Motoon insisted. "Go." "Keep out of sight," Cooper said. "I'll—" 2 arrows slammed into him in quick succession. His body swayed in the saddle for a second or two, then fell. Penelope grabbed Adeline by the elbow and dragged her. The girl was sobbing now, tears drenching her face. She was petrified, frozen in place. Penelope had to drag her to get her to move. "Come on! I'm so sorry." The girl got lighter. "Forgive us, my dear, we have to do this." It was Caverfield. He picked up Adeline and threw her over one shoulder. "I thought you were dead," Penelope exclaimed. "Feels like I am. Move." He still had the arrow in him, she saw. It was sticking out of the back of his shoulder. He was heavily favoring the other arm. "Cover my 6. She knocked an arrow, stepped out into the open. She located a bandit, drew, missed again. Fuck, had all those hours training with Kelly been for nothing? Where was this second nature? Johnson appeared, fired his own arrow into the outlaw. She took off with Caverfield and the girl. By now, her heart felt like it was going to explode. Any minute now, blood would just come spraying out of her ears and nose and she'd fall over dead. Where was the bloody military? She realized she was waiting for them and they would probably be far too late if they came at all. How long had it been? 10 minutes? 15? It felt like several hours. She felt like soldiers should be streaming in any minute now, when they were all still a long ride away. They had to have seen the flare, right? If not, they'd certainly hear these explosions, wouldn't? 2 outlaws sprang from the desert, bursting from the sand. She fumbled with her bow. One of them smacked her with a rod or staff or something, and she went down like a ton of bricks. Caverfield threw the girl, tossed her like a sack of rice, and reefed his sword up from his hip. He shouldered the one, clanged swords with the other. He stumbled a bit, got smacked in the knee by the rod, went over. Johnson fired one into the bandit, killed him clean. Penelope looked back to see her protector some 15 meters back on his horse, going for another arrow. A shaft landed in Johnson's chest. He jerked and tumbled off the horse. "No!" she shrieked, turning and diving, bulldozing into the remaining bandit. He went over, she was on top of him. Where was her bow? A rock in the sand. She was smashing again and again, crushing the man's skull. He'd been dead for a while when her breath finally gave out and her arms wouldn't smash anymore. She was hollow, dead inside, on her knees in the middle of nowhere, covered in blood, destined to be killed or raped in the coming minutes. She'd gotten Johnson killed, gotten her friend killed. From some distant place, the sounds of the outside world came back to her. It was gradual, a distant sound that arose in the volume in her ears. It was Adeline. She was blathering. I'm sorry, this is all my fault, this is... Penelope looked over. Adeline was crushed, distraught, broken. She stood, the dagger in her hand. Penelope suddenly knew what the girl was going to do. No! Princess Adeline drove the dagger down, stabbing herself, again and again and again in the stomach. No! She rushed over. Adeline kept stabbing and stabbing, spitting out little whimpers with each thrust. 7, 8 times. Penelope got there, grabbing the girl by the wrist. But by then, Adeline had not the strength to keep holding the dagger. Blood was oozing out of her. Her gaze was distant and her face was as white as milk. No sooner had Penelope gotten to her than her legs gave out and she soon collapsed in Penelope's arms. "Princess! Princess!" she sobbed, trying to hold the girl. I'm sorry, Princess." The girl was distant now, her eyes vacant, her words slow. She said, "Forgive me." Then she seemed to lose consciousness, her head lolling to the side. Penelope Humberton was exhausted, wrecked, empty. She was dehydrated and broken. She knew in her bones her fate was now immutable. This entire venture was the worst decision of her life, the last of her life. Some distant part of her, just breaking the waves of her unconscious, realized Adeline's choice had been the proper way out, the best way out. Maybe that was her way out too. And it was as this thought was arising in her mind, she remembers quite clearly, the hair on her arm stood on end once more. Moreover, she felt a warmth in her gut, like a snake of pure energy uncoiling. Her lungs sucked in a deep breath of their own volition, and she felt herself becoming incredibly aroused. Her nipples became erect, and her crotch. She's no longer kneeling in the desert. There's no longer blood spattered everywhere on the sand and brush, nor on herself. She is pristinely clean, cleaner than she's been in weeks. Her hair is soft, draped lightly on her shoulders, and she is nude. She stands ankle-deep in snow. Snow, a condition she's only ever read about. There are trees about. She's in a forest. There are branches doused in snow and heavy under the weight of it. She is not cold, the white stuff not affecting her. In fact, she is quite warm. There is a woman standing before her, some meters off, beneath the branches of a very large tree. This woman is also nude, and she has many breasts. 6, 8, 10 of them, like an udder. She is very well endowed, with wide hips and perfectly brushed white hair. Her face is somewhat obscured by the branch she stands under. Penelope, upon seeing her, immediately takes a step in that direction. Yet the woman jerks up a hand, pushes outward on the air. Penelope goes flying backwards, is lifted off of her feet. She landed with a thud in the sand. Her eyes went to her bow, some 5 meters off. Caverfield, he may have a broken leg by now, or a sprained ankle, was limping. "Pen, go to the girl," she said mechanically, moving for her bow. "This is not her time. The gods are not taking her back this day." She picked up her bow, snatched 6 arrows from the quiver. 5 of them she pinched at the ready in her left hand. The 6th she knocked and drew with her right. She turned. There were 10 bandits still standing. 6 of them in her immediate line of sight. 4 more on the opposite side of what had been their train. And, yes, there were 2 scouts, or commanders, she knew not which, some 750 meters or more off to the south. They were on a ridge in the desert. She didn't know how she knew that they'd been there. She drew, loosed, flicked the next arrow into place, drew again, loosed again, and again, and again, and again, and again. In a span of less than 6 seconds, 6 outlaws all fell from their mounts. 6 more arrows in her hand, and now she was running, sprinting. She placed her left foot on a crate of supplies near an overturned cart, thrust herself into the air, landed on the side of that cart. She sidestepped, an arrow just missed her. She swung her gaze. Knock, draw, loose. Again, again, again. 4 more down. She ran once more, down the edge of that cart, and heaved herself once more into the air. Grabbed a hold of the edge of Upton's cart, slammed her feet into the side of it, pulled up, rolled onto the top of it. Last 2 arrows. Knock, draw. The second arrow was launched before the first had slain the first scout. She was later told it was a distance of almost 800 meters. Exhaustion took her, and the world went dark, and she fell off the side of the cart. Princess Adeline survived. The Paynes Find operational base had a medical unit on hand. She spent 10 hours in surgery, but she did pull through. They described it as a miracle. She regained consciousness in the Perth Military Hospital after having been rushed there as soon as she was stable. Prince Hulagu himself personally visited her on more than one occasion. Hector Heritage stayed with her, relocating to Perth and visiting her 3 or 4 times a week as she underwent an intensive recovery at the Banditry Halfway House. He buried his brother in Leinster, settled his affairs, and moved away within 2 days. The desert reminded him too much of Lewis. Charlie Jameson also made it. The girl lost 6 centimeters of her bowel and had to be given a blood transfusion, but she pulled through. She moved in with her aunt and is currently working on a compendium of desert banditry. She received a grant from the town of Leinster and is interviewing anyone and everyone who claims to have brushed paths or survived the moon panther or any of the other names drifting on the desert wind. Eldrake, Wormslayer, Sandstorm. Further funding for this, as well as a host of new interviewees, came from the Military Operations Center of the Goldfields region, which sent in a request for information sharing on her then only partially finished manuscript and thereafter unsealed some of their archives to contribute. Lucas Caverfield moved away from the southwest. He worked for a period of several weeks in Perth advising on the banditry situation, but left as soon as funds became available to do so. He relocated to Sydney, convinced that Ibar's the Moon Panther, or one of Pedro Kimber's other lieutenants, would wreak a havoc still on that side of the continent. He now works as a bodyguard for a wealthy Sydney executive, making far less money than the camel train offered. Both the Geraldton East Camel Train Company and Desert Security Forces Limited contested the pensions of Marie Upton and Stephen Cooper on similar grounds, arguing that both had terminated their employment in violation of contract, and beneficiary payout was therefore forfeit in the event of their deaths. A Geraldton court shot down the case of Miss Upton, rewarding her pension to her sister, whereas Mr. Cooper's case went to a circuit court in Mandurah, which eventually ruled in favour of Mr. Cooper's fiancée. Conrad Hagar continues to travel by camel train, selling his art in Geraldton and Kalgoorlie. He became a bit of a local celebrity in Leinster, though that fame did not travel before him to other markets. He did, however, have a relatively good year in Kalgoorlie, Norseman and Esperance when he began to transition from erotic nudes to scenes of the horrors of bandit warfare. Word was sent to Europe to inform Johnson Ramos's next of kin of his passing. Renee Humberton was the one to dig out the employment contract he'd signed and sent on the letter, rewritten several times to get the wording right and signed with the forged signature of her cousin to Mr. Ramos's niece. Within a little over 3 months, word returned from the young woman requesting her uncle's ashes. Though there was some terse language in the letter, she at least expressed pride that Johnson had died for a noble cause. Once more it was Renee that answered the letter and forwarded the ashes. Ashlyn Mulholland, following a sedition scare which could potentially compromise him, moved away from Moxie Breastbind comics. He continued illustrating Black Fox publications, some of which did quite well, but was most successful illustrating Princess Adeline and the Payne's Find Assault, a tale inspired by true events, which he published with the approval of the titular character, a portion of the proceeds going towards her getting on her feet after the halfway house. One particular heroine in the comic went unnamed, and always had her face obscured by a hood she wore, though she was shown to be quite busty and was nude gratuitously. Roland Erickson, following the Upton trial, was dismissed from his post forthwith. He cashed out his pension and retired early, purchasing a modest property in Geraldton. His termination had almost been a relief for him, for when he learned of what transpired at Payne's Find, his fears of the desert were realized in his mind, and he was glad to be rid of that treacherous route. He later described his complicity in that tragedy by allowing that small unit to depart without the support of the company as his greatest regret in life. He went on to give a series of talks at colleges, churches, and community centers up and down the west coast to this effect. He did, however, make one final journey into the desert, to Leinster, to throw himself on the mercy of the one he forced into that position. He was turned away at the door by Renee Humberton, who said her cousin unfortunately wasn't taking visitors. Motoon, for a time, attempted to carry on a relationship with the woman that threw herself at him on that unforgettable journey. However, Laverton to Leinster is around a 250-kilometer journey, and although they had at least a few instances to share a bed without being interrupted, most of their actual relationship took place in letters sent back and forth, some of which were replied to by Renee, again forging a signature. Their relationship, if it could ever have been called that, fizzled out when the letters began containing fewer and fewer words and came and went with much less frequency. He began dating a young woman local to the Laverton area, and the two are now expecting their first child. Renee Humberton cancelled the lease on her flat in Lenora and moved to Leinster permanently. She was put on salary and ran Penelope's business almost single-handedly, including coordinating with Ash Mulholland, shipping, distribution, and advising on the levels of nudity in the artwork. She did this leaving behind a beloved life further south and worked extra hours to pay the extra therapy costs for her cousin. She tirelessly works to support her cousin, cooking for her, cleaning up after her, ensuring she makes her appointments, sometimes bathing her. She even went so far as to bring in a shamanist fortune teller, placating the encounter vision that her cousin described from that fateful day. Penelope wrote a detailed report of everything at the Payne's operational base. She later rewrote the report from her lounge room 3 times, forwarding copies to military headquarters on Harrison Island and Perth. The most recent copy written, one which contains her experiences of poor timing with Motoon, she has not forwarded to Harrison Island. Kelly Conlon and Josephine Crawley have shown up several times to talk with her, having made the ride-in from Lake Darlick. They were rebuffed the first 2 times by Renee, with that tired line that Penelope wasn't taking visitors. The 3rd time they pushed their way past the woman and found Penelope, her hair a mess, her skin pale, the smell of days-old sweat pasted to her, wearing just a robe, staring vacantly out at a newspaper article about increased banditry activity from the notorious El Drache. The 2 women proceeded to sit down with Penelope, each telling the story of their first banditry kill, and how they coped with it, how they still cope with it. Josephine went so far as to say, a little pink in the cheeks, that she'd nearly joined the concubinage a world away in Torrens Coast. Penelope listened, but in the end only replied with, "It wasn't me." Kelly said, "You received commendation directly from the Hulagu ministry. It was his body, but—" Her stare was vacant, almost haunted. "I met a goddess." "She thinks she had a religious experience," Renee explained to them in the other room. "Dr. Harrisburg thinks it might be an unconscious way of avoiding blame, a way of not seeing herself as bloodthirsty. She'd killed 12 bandits in the span of perhaps 90 seconds, plus a few others in the moments before that, one of whom she used a rock to bash in the skull of. In the next week and a half, there were more attempts made, including a visit from Eunice Dillashaw, Casey Lennox, Sidney Wang, and others from Darlot with an oversized get-well-soon card. But there was no impact made. She wasn't eating, and Renee struggled with her to even get her out of bed in the morning. "Christ," Renee blurted out one morning, when her cousin just wanted to roll over and curl up again. She scurried around the bed, took hold of Penelope, looked her in the eye. "Listen, I know what you went through out there was horrible. I know you lost friends and you think this is your fault, and I'm sorry for all of that. But you have to get out of bed. That goddess is not coming back. She's not going to give you any meaning to this. You went through a horrible experience. People died, you survived, you have to get on with your own life." Renee ultimately left for work with her cousin still in bed. She spent the entire day with a nauseating feeling of dread that Penelope might try what Princess Adeline had tried at Payne's Find. When she returned home that night, Penelope was still in bed, and it looked like she hadn't left it. Renee went in, sat down beside her cousin. "Listen, I'm sorry for yelling at you this morning. That's just that I want you to get better. I want you to be you again, and not keep dwelling on banditry and this horrible episode. But I understand that takes time. I'll make dinner. I hope you'll have some. Oh, and you've got mail." She dropped the letters next to her cousin. Penelope, still lying on her side, flipped through them. Bills, junk, a card from Dana Mulholland, and there was one card from an address she didn't recognize. The postal code was Perth. She opened it, sat up in bed. "Miss Humberton, please forgive my silence with any correspondence. My actions in a moment of chaos and guilt have shamed me. Yes, the officials here at the halfway house are quick to point out that attempted suicide should be seen in context of my post-traumatic stress and not as a shame, but that is the feeling I'm left with when I speak about this nonetheless. I am ashamed. I feel weak and broken. It has been quite difficult for me to enunciate this, and as a result, I have not written. I feel as though my silence has been so unimaginably selfish, having taken so much from you and not even given a single letter in return. I have been strongly encouraged to write you. Were it not for you, I would be dead or worse now. This is the reality I was in for those fateful few days. This is the reality that you deliberated on, acted on, and ultimately sacrificed friends because of. I don't know how to express my gratitude to yourself, nor all those folk that took the risk they did, defying Mr. Quinn's advice. I know you probably have some resentment, perhaps a great deal toward me, because of what happened at Payne's Find. I will never be able to make amends for that. Mr. Cooper, Mr. Jameson, Miss Upton, Mr. Ramos, believe me when I say that I feel their loss every day. Hector visits me 3 times a week. I can see plainly on his face the pain he feels for his brother. Part of him, I know, blames me for that. I understand that. Some part of you, I imagine, may blame me for those losses as well. Perhaps that's why you've had no contact. I understand that as well. I may be here for a while to come, though they say I've made good progress. I speak in group every day now, and I'm trying to be as open as I can with my therapist. I'm working with agents from Harrison Island, and they tell me what I've provided them has been very helpful. They've had 3 successful raids in the past 2 months. Group sessions are difficult. I remained silent in them for a long time, but they've helped me come to the terms with the fact that what happened to me out there was rape and enslavement. These are not easy words for me, and I still have very conflicted feelings about Mr. Kimbers. They very much want me not to call him Master Pedro. Part of my therapy is to secure a name for myself. I still can't remember what my mother called me. I can't remember my mother. And I can't exactly go calling myself Adeline, Princess on a resume. Although I'm told keeping this name would be fully acceptable, so long as I am the one choosing it. I've given this a lot of thought, and in the end, there's only one name I can choose. I hope you don't think it too greedy of me. I wish you all the best. The caring and kindness you showed me were what kept me from trying again to end my own life. For many years, I knew only the raw viciousness of man in his primal barbarian state. It was you that showed me there was far more than that. Thank you. With sincere love, Adeline Penelope Payne. Penelope read the letter, then read it again. She realized at one point that she had a tear on her cheek. She appeared in the kitchen as Renee was cutting up some mutton. It's good to see you out of bed. Are you hungry? Very. Listen, how's the shop doing? How are the finances? You don't need to worry about that. I've got things under control. Did you want to see Dr. Harrisburg tomorrow? Is that it? We can always work it that you can talk if you want to. No, Penelope said. What I'm thinking is if you could send a letter up to Kelly or Josephine at Lake Darlet, see if I could tag along on the next trip. Tag along? I want to go to Perth. There's someone I need to see. This concludes the reading of The Pirate's Lass, a story of the Mongolian Book of the Sky by Jason Shannon. This story was read by Andrew C. Bunton. Check out Andrew's YouTube channel by searching Buttons-tastica in the search field. Music by Michael Hebbs. Check out Michael's YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/c/Michael Hebbs. This program was directed and produced by Jason Shannon. The Mongolian Book of the Sky is an ongoing novel series written by Jason Shannon. These stories constitute shorter episodes within the expanded universe. The first novel in the series, The Hounds of Harujin, is anticipated to publish in 2017. For more information on Jason Shannon and his writing, visit www.jasonmshannon.com. For more information regarding the Mongolian Book of the Sky series, including more stories like this one absolutely free, visit www.harujinsounds.com. That's www.harujinsounds.com. Text copyright 2016 by Jason Shannon. Production copyright 2017 by Jason Shannon. All rights reserved. No part of this recording may be played for an audience or reproduced in any form. It may not be streamed, downloaded, broadcast, or copied without prior written consent from the author. Address all inquiries to jm1shannon@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.